Calling to order our March 25th public session. If we could all please rise.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Before we get started with tonight's meeting, we have a lot of new board members, so they may not be aware that March is actually Board of Education Appreciation Month. And it's just a time when to say thank you to the people who dedicate so much of their time to serve this community in such an important capacity. And you all have a little token gift and a little note. But this side of the table and some people out there have a token gift as well. And I think it was just, as I was planning this evening, there is no way we could do what we do without the support from all of you. For us, if we're doing our jobs, it means we're asking tough questions. It means we're demanding more information. It means we're pushing you guys to think about things differently. And I just wanted to actually take a chance to say thank you to all of you for all of your time and all of your effort and all of the thought you put into what we do. And I want to say thank you to all of you for helping us do our jobs. It's greatly appreciated. Back in January, I had the pleasure of attending the WIS concert, and they sang a song that just, listen to the lyrics, enjoy the show, and then I'll finish my little spiel. Meredith? a million dreams for the world we're going to make. That's why we do this. So unfortunately, our first official agenda item tonight, we will be tabling until April. We were supposed to be honoring Sarah for her years of service, but she unfortunately has caught the nasty bug that is going around Weston, and she is not feeling well. So we are going to table that until April, and so we will just postpone that. So our next agenda item is, with Sarah stepping down, she was the secretary-treasurer of the board. We do need to hold that election. At this point, I would welcome any nominations from our board members.
So,
Ruby?
yeah. Can you hear me?
Yes.
So I have had the pleasure of working with Tony Pesco over the last 3 months, and I found him to be thoughtful. I found him to be pragmatic, and I've, above all, found him to be very fair. And he brings to the table almost 30 years of finance experience, which has proven in my eyes to be an important asset to this budget season, and will greatly benefit from on the executive board. So with that, do I say the motion?
Not yet. I have to see if there are any
okay.
other nominations.
So I would like to nominate Tony Pesco.
Thank you. Any other nominations? All right. If we could, since you so nicely nominated Tony, Ruby, would you please read the motion and just add Tony's name in, please?
Yes. Move that the Weston Board of Education elect Tony Pesco as the board secretary treasurer.
May I have a second, please?
I'll second.
Thank you, Ellen. Any further discussion or comment? All in favor?
Aye.
Great. Thank you. Congratulations, Tony.
Thank you. I accept it with honor.
And now we have approval of minutes. Could I have a motion, please?
Do you want to do them all together, or?
Yeah.
All right. Move that the Weston Board of Education approve the minutes from February 25th executive session, February 25th regular session, March 6th special meeting, March 12th special meeting, and March 21st executive session.
May I have a second, please?
Second.
Thank you, Tony. Does anyone have any edits, adjustments, comments to any of these?
Question, should I abstain one way or another since I have not had them?
I will let Dan answer this question.
No, you don't need to abstain. You're not voting on the accuracy of the minutes. You're just attesting to the fact that those are the minutes
Very good, thank you.
for the meeting as per Robert's rules.
Thank you. All in favor?
Aye.
Great. Thank you. When I was researching a matter to answer a parent question, I did come across an adjustment that I think that we need to make to our minutes from October 22nd. That is the meeting in which we approved the funding for the Phase 2 facility study, and the official minutes did not indicate the amount that we approved. And so I reached out to Dr. McCursey and asked what is the process for us to get the official amount included in. And so basically that's the amendment that I'm requesting, is to add the $24,000 amount in for the Phase 2 facility study. So if I could have a motion, please.
I move that the Western Board of Education adopt the amended Board of Education minutes from October 22nd, 2018.
May I have a second?
Second.
Thank you, Tony. Any further comments, discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Great, thank you. At this time on our agenda, it is for public comment. I welcome anyone if they would like to speak. Just want to make sure I know you've heard me say it before, we cannot engage in a back and forth dialogue, but you're welcome to approach. Please name and just your street address, please. Yes, please. If you just hold it down slightly, the light will turn green.
Do we want to turn the lights on?
There you
for
go.
this session?
Yeah.
Can we turn the lights on, Sean?
Lights, thank you.
All right.
Hi.
Hi, my name is Shahzad Zafar, 51 Old Hyde Road.
Hi.
Okay, I have a couple of questions. You can stop me if you think they're not relevant right now. One is regarding this phase 1 and phase 2 study.
Thank you.
I keep hearing about it, but I think one of the meetings you guys discussed that you actually had a study 15, 20 years ago, what made you decide to go to a 4-school system. Do you know what the findings of that study are? Why we chose this school versus that? And why do you want to talk about going back to 3-school system?
I just
I just want to, if there is something out there, if you can refer me, that'd be helpful. Just to know what the initial study did, what made us go to a 4-school system, what is the size of the elementary school, and why was it recommended to go to that?
I would encourage you to, if you're available, to stay. Tonight, we are going to be reviewing some of the history of the district as part of our agenda item tonight. And then what I would say is if there's additional information you would like after that, please feel free actually to email Dr. McCursey, and we can figure out the best way to provide that information.
Fair enough. Second thing is regarding the school budget. I'm new to the process and maybe I just don't know it, but I feel like the school budget is from year to year. It's not like a 3-year or a 5-year or any projection as to what it's supposed to be. And every day the school budget increases, it increases the town tax rate. It affects everybody in the town. I don't see a plan in place which says, okay, we're going to go to 4%, okay, we're going to cut everything down, come back to 2.53, get it passed this year. What will we do next year or the year after that? Because a big part of that is what Dr. McCursey alluded to are our commitments to salaries and other things, which you just can't change that quickly. And everything else is pretty much educational stuff, like, cut this project challenge or cut other things, which I think is going to hurt the school in the long term. So I would like to see something for 3-year, 5-year, something to tell us that, okay, if we do 3% or 4% this year, what will be next year or the year after that? Thank you.
Thank you. Actually, if there's a little button that says push, if you hold that down till the light turns green. There you go.
There you go. So my name is Eric Struminger. I live in Weston on 26 Silver Ridge Common. A couple of questions. First, I guess following the thread from the previous question on a multi-year budget, are there contingency plans in place, or at least a study underway to look at plans to reduce costs, in particular costs that don't affect the classroom, in the event that we have mounting budget pressures? And if so, how and when will that be communicated to residents?
I mean, I guess you may want to repeat. Unfortunately, as with all public bodies, we can't get in a Q&A, and we can explain why. So we can take it as a comment as opposed to a question. But I don't know, Louis, if you want to quickly review why, because we have two. No, it's actually you're asking the question, but the board cannot get in a back and forth. But we're taking it in.
That's fine. I don't need an explanation of that.
You sure? I mean, because we're not the board. I'm actually a superintendent speaking up for the board. So I want you to think the elected officials are not listening, or not paying attention, but they're actually strict legal reasons. So it may be worth, since. Louis, just quickly, just in deference
just to clarify,
to
right,
parents
for,
here.
for everybody, what happens is the Board of Education can only discuss amongst them. It's a meeting in public, so it's a business meeting they're essentially having. And what happens is, unless it's posted for public discourse, we can't engage with the public on issues, especially issues that aren't on the agenda. Right now, the budget itself is not on the agenda tonight. The board could choose to have such a workshop were they to do that, but tonight that's not on the agenda, so they can't engage because that would violate the Freedom of Information Act.
Okay.
It's
So
technicality.
maybe I could slightly rephrase the statement.
Right, but I could say, Superintendent, I'm listening very much.
yeah.
The multi-year
Yeah, we'll-
budget concern, the issue of the phase 1, phase 2 concern, I've heard that, so.
It would be very
definitely
helpful if the
listening.
board could host a public session on that to look at contingency planning. If we continue to see the same pressures on revenue in the town and cost, which it seems quite likely will be the case, what are the steps that are being undertaken to reduce non-student costs. Okay?
Great.
And then the second thing, this again, I may run up into the same issue, but there was this theft that was reported, and we got some emails from Dr. McCursey with some very superficial details about it. I understand it's now a police matter. It would be very helpful to have more communication about exactly what happened here, and if it's a very small issue, then probably not worth, a lot of time. But if it in fact is a large theft and involves multiple layers, it would be instructive to know how that could be prevented in the future, and are there the appropriate controls in place to ensure that that doesn't happen in the future.
Thank you. Greg, are you wanting to speak tonight? Okay. And then our student reps, I'm assuming, are at Meet the Coaches Night tonight. I'm assuming that's where they both are, student reps?
Yeah.
So new business, retirements.
Retirements. I have to apologize. I don't have that in my packet.
We don't either.
Yeah, that's
I
why
mean,
I'm-
it's an item, but we don't have anything
It's
attached.
listed as a resignation.
That
not
I
a
have.
resignation.
I wasn't aware of I was announcing a retirement today, but I am announcing resignations
Yeah.
tonight.
Okay.
There's no retirements in the.
I didn't think so. That's why it was listed that way on the agenda, and it threw me off. And I want to make sure I got it right. So, yes. We have a couple of issues here. The resignation that we have before you has to do with a teacher who is moving out of state. Her name is Marissa Considine. I think I'm pronouncing that right. Yep, I am. And it'll be effective the end of the school year. And Dr. McCursey has accepted that resignation. And the way we do it here is we bring it to you to note for the record. But that's how we accept it through the superintendent.
Could I have a motion, please?
Move that the Weston Board of Education acknowledge the resignation of Marissa Considine, Weston High School mathematics teacher, effective June 30th, 2019.
May I have a second?
Second.
Thank you, Ellen. Any further comments, discussion?
Just that I think we don't say it enough, that every teacher, every person who's part of the system is part of the success of the system too. And so when they leave, it's for their own reasons, and it's certainly understandable, but they will be missed.
Mhm.
And if I could just add, in this particular case, they're actually moving all the way across the entire country to
That's
California. We're going to miss her, but it's a great opportunity. I understand that they're pursuing, so we'll miss them. But thank you.
Then we're happy for them.
All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you. And at this point, we are now on a facilities use history update.
Right.
Percy?
So I think while people are positioned, Ken, you're going to go over there with Laura and Patty are both up, right? So as those of us up front, we're going to want to shift, but what I had announced to the board and to a certain extent the community is that this month, stepping back to look at key history as it relates to our whole campus and facilities, Ken and Laura, Patty are going to walk the board and thus the community through, and this will all be in the public record, the history of the campus, the 4 buildings, et cetera. Then we'll turn to a very detailed review of the Phase 1 feasibility study. And Sir Petrocelli is here to do that with Ruth Rudel. That study was presented to the board and the community back in November 2017, but given we have 40% new board membership, and with the Phase 2 study underway, we felt it was very important to review that. So while those are two separate agenda items, they're very much linked. Then in April, you'll receive the report out on the Phase 2 study, which is really looking at what would it mean conceptually, feasibly, to have 3 sites as opposed to 4, and there'll be 2 parts to that. One is there any validity potential to have a combined secondary site, and in there have 2 schools, a middle school and a high school, but we actually will make a lot of mileage on that question of could you have a larger elementary school leaving your middle school and high school as separate sites. So in April, you'll have, as a board, you'll receive fairly robust analysis. It's all still the feasibility of it as to the 3 sites. And then it'll be that idea of either a large elementary with the high school, middle school as a separate site, or a combined secondary site. But you'll get all of that in April. But to sort of help that discussion, we want to now in March bring you the history of how we've been using our buildings and then review the Phase 1 study. So this will be a fairly extensive piece of work, but it's critical you have that background. And I think we'll need to move because of the...
Okay. All right. Good evening, everyone. And I have to say that this project has been a welcome distraction from the budget process. This was truly an enjoyable experience of going around, talking to staff members who lived through this time period, who had a great deal of information. In fact, Patty and I know Lisa have been here since 1995, and I think Lisa even earlier, and some board members maybe as well. So this was a chance to go down memory lane and try to make some sense of where we've been and give you some timely information to think about where we're going as we look ahead to the April meeting. So I kind of started with breaking down the time periods, and we'll tunnel into those time periods. We'll just recap where we are, present day, very briefly, and then a period of exponential growth in the district, much like the Paleozoic geologic time period where there's tremendous speciation. There was just a number of students coming into the district at that point. We reached a tipping point 2002 to 2005, leading up to some significant building construction with the opening of WIS in 2005-06. And then we've moved from that period into what I've just kind of dubbing the wonder years, in that we've had a great deal of fluctuation in enrollment. We're kind of wondering, you know, is this going to significantly decrease, by how much? And so we've seen it level out recently. So those are the periods we're going to look at. Laura and Patty are going to chime in as we move along. We'll have time for questions at the end. And so here we go. So currently, let's see if we just get this thing started. Let's see. So we're currently at 2,300 students or so, and back in 2000 was another time when we were at that level. Four sites, and what I'm going to take you through are really some of the fluctuations in enrollment as we've seen changes in grade configurations, building configurations, and I think in more recent years, looking at the evolution of programs and services would be helpful for you to see some of those changing needs in education over time. So going to Hurlbut, it's our pre-K to 2 building. We actually have 3 pre-K classes, 424 students, pretty typical of elementary schools in this area, between 400 and 500 students. At the WIS, we're just over 500 students, the grades 3 through 5. And, the community has, as opposed to some that have 2 or 3 or 6 K-5 buildings, in this community, when WIS was constructed, decided to go K2, 3, 5, so that each child could experience that new facility as they move through, and we avoid districting, redistricting, and all that very challenging stuff. Middle school, grades 6 through 8. Middle school's seen a variety of different configurations. Middle schools are generally bigger than elementary schools. 582 is about when I came in 2008, about the same size that I experienced at that time, about 11 years ago. High school, 800 students, and at the beginning of this history lesson, it was actually half that size, about 400 students. So that's where we're starting from, and then we're going to go into the growth years. And and Lisa has actually came into the district in 1984, 85, I believe? 85. And so the reason I bring this up is we have a tremendous amount of knowledge and history in this district that you as board members can tap into with questions to help you in this process. So we had 3 sites at the time. We were seeing tremendous growth in just those 5 years, 40% increase in population. If you look to the left, in 1997, the 3 segments of Hurlbut, South House, East House, and North House, they were connected in 1997 with a central building. What you see on the left in black and white is the drop-off loop before the central building was located, and we are looking at South House, and not in the picture is North House to the left. So just give you a little perspective. And central office was in place at that time in the early 90s. It was built specifically for a central office, and previous to that, central office has been in other places depending on where space was available. A question did come up at the Board of Finance meeting about how long we had the assistant super, the HR positions. The assistant super for curriculum instruction has been in place since 1997, the HR position since 2003. So if we move into Hurlbut, Hurlbut was quite large at that time. We're looking at, for this time period, about 800 students, and we're talking a pre-K to 3 building. So in addition to a principal, we had 2 assistant principals, 2 librarians, 2 nurses. So in some ways, it's almost 2 buildings in one at that time. And if you look at the enrollment, we were in 1998-99 at 859 students. Below that is a little history on how Hurlbut evolved over time. What I didn't list there, in 1963, the big Hurlbut fire, if you go over to the Historical Society, there's all kinds of information, I guess that just attracted a lot of attention. Fortunately, no one was hurt in that fire. But the key piece here is K to 3 building, 859 students. Education, as you'll see later, changed significantly from this time period. If we look at the middle school, we didn't have WIS, obviously. Similar structure, principal, 2 assistant principals, 2 librarians. We were at one point around 1,000 students at the middle school. And so if you look at those, you look at these graphs, you look at the chart, you could see 2000 we were at 1,000 students. And you might say, well, how did we fit them in here? We didn't. We had 9 portables. So 9 portables around this building was how we were able to shoehorn that number of students in grades 4 through 8. And obviously at the bottom gives you some facts on how the construction took place in this building. But those 9 portables came along, and there's Mrs. Falber, hired as a 5th grade teacher here. Again, a lot of history, a lot of information. The high school, take a look here. Early on in 95, 96, we had classes under 100 students. So everybody knew each other's name. And there certainly, slowly but surely that high school increased in size. 1 principal, 1 assistant principal until 2002, 2003. Obviously, the high school opened 68, 69. The addition was done 05, 06, finished 07, I think, somewhere in there when we put the science and arts wings on. But you could see now, towards 2000, we're getting classes just over 100 students at the high school, and the high schools feeling that increased enrollment coming in. So then we have some continued growth in the system, another couple hundred students over the 2002 to 2005 time period. We actually moved to 4 sites plus 9 portables. You actually can consider it, I mean, you could 4 sites with 9 portables, or if you think of 3 sites plus Kinderland, 19 portables, because Kinderland was actually another 10 portables. That's our current business offices, town offices. So that population in 01, 02 is very similar to what we have now. And if we look at Kinderland, this was your Kinderland. As you come up that ramp to the business office, those little lines, white lines, were where students lined up at the end of the day when they lined up for the buses. And Kinderland, 10 classrooms. We actually have some elementary teachers who remember it well, maybe their first position here. And so it was, students had either 2 full days, 2 half days, and an extended day. So Monday, class of 20 elementary students, kindergarten students, were here until 1:15. Then Tuesday, Thursday, one half of the class was here for the full day. Wednesday, Friday, the other half of the class was here for the full day. But then, some would go home earlier at around noontime and take the bus home. So it was a different experience, and it was because we were in a pinch. We were thinking about construction, thinking about what to do next, and we had no art in the classrooms. Library rolled over books on a cart. When we had to take students over to to Hurlbut, there was no crosswalk. Teachers were kind of putting their life in front of the traffic to keep them safe. One of the portables here was a PE classroom. Speech and SPED, there was one room for that. Nowadays, there's much more space that's needed for SPED and related services than that. And we had actually a nurse over at Kinderland. So you could see, those were some really large kindergarten cohorts as compared to what we're experiencing today. And so Hurlbut, now when kindergarten moved over to Kinderland, we took another grade down from the middle school because the middle school was having difficulty handling all of the population that it had. So grades pre-K and grades 1 through 4 were in Hurlbut. And you could see in terms of the numbers, we were still at pushing 800 students by 2004, 2005. So in this time period, obviously we were looking at construction, looking at building the WIS. All that was being talked about and planned for, and by the time we got to 2005, 2006, we went to a Foresight Campus. So here, the middle school, moving 4th grade down, helped to bring that down a little bit into the 800s by 2004, 2005. The high school, again, steadily growing. And by 2004, 2005, we're up in 700 students range, 715. So the high school grew pretty quickly as well. And then, ta-da, the WIS opens. And so we have our Foresight Campus, and you could see for this time period, we were pretty steady in terms of the enrollment. Nice picture of the ribbon cutting. Another important note is that we went to a 2-tier bus system, and we had 3 tiers previously, and when Kinderland was in place, we actually had a 4th tier because you had to take the partial day students home so that they'd had transportation. So that was significant cost savings. We had the AIM initiative started in 2009, which was a performance-based learning initiative, which has still had impact to this day. We moved from department chairs to a curriculum instructional leader model, which I can talk more with board members, might have questions about that coming on. So things have really changed by now in terms of education. So when we think about space needs, we think about the complexity of education. Kindergarten, the expectations have ramped up. And sometimes you might hear kindergarten's the new first grade in some ways. But for us, purposeful play has remained extremely important. I know that's important to Laura. And but we've talked. I mean, special ed and related services, we see more complex needs related to children. So speech and language, other services, we've needed additional space, more special ed sized classrooms. And obviously we're mandated to do that, both legally and morally to do that. Science, inquiry-based programs. We had a review of the science program in the mid 2000s that led to more inquiry-based learning, and we infused science labs at Hurlbut and WIS, where students will go, and that's where the materials, all the setup, and the wet labs take place. And then SRBI, scientific research-based interventions, reading, writing, math. We're required to provide those now, and so an additional 4 or 5 classrooms within the buildings were needed to just provide those services to catch students before needs became so great that they might need more specialized education. So I think you'll see now as we move along the presentation, you'll see some of the things we've done more recently that impact our thinking about programs and space and so forth. So again, the numbers at Hurlbut, we're kind of starting now to level into the 500s in 2009, 2010. And then at WIS, some of the things we've added, math and writing enrichment in relation to the Project Challenge program, updates we made. When we opened WIS, we added the 4th and 5th grade choral programs, and the configuration of WIS had taken that into account when we built that. So here, looking at the numbers, WIS had 2009, 2010, over 600 students. And then moving into the middle school, we established a pure teaming model where small groups of students had the same group of teachers. We, just behind me where they're broadcasting from now, we put in the TV studio when this room was renovated, 2009, 2010. These glass walls here, these were all cinder walls. We were able to, on a shoestring budget, do a really nice renovation here, which I think is serving us well. Because science did not have, they had one sink in their rooms, we moved them to art classrooms where there were larger and 2 or 3 times the number of sinks available. There were 4 art classrooms. We didn't need 4, but we moved the science classrooms in there. And I think there's a misnomer out there that right now in our current science program that we don't need labs because we have shifted to an amplified program. That's a misnomer. We more than ever need those labs because students need to still, with their hands, experience the learning that they have. And we have a music technology course that came online as well that we had planned for students who generally, these are like the general music students who don't necessarily play an instrument, but we were actively having them create music. So that was an additional space. So in the middle school, we were, really at the current level, just under, 600 students. Yeah. Then at the high school, the construction, you can see here, there's just a picture of the fencing, the construction that was going on that led to the new state-of-the-art science and art wings. The auditorium was renovated. There's pictures of that. And I think proudly, and I know Lisa's very proud of this, the Project Lead the Way program added with 50 students, now over 100, and we've achieved greater gender balance in those programs. But again, that's a whole wing of classrooms at the high school. So now you're looking at an close to 800 student high school at this time. And then as we move to the last decade, what we've called the wonder years because of the fluctuating enrollment and the uncertainty of, how steep was the decline going to be. It actually has, leveled off now as we've heard, and all of these numbers have come from Malone and McBroom's report from the fall. So I'm using that information. We shifted to full-day kindergarten, 2012, 2013. All our libraries have been transformed into learning commons. We've added space for the maker spaces. The number of students has gone down from 2,500 to 2,300 in this time period, and I think we'll be celebrating the 50th anniversary shortly. I know Lisa has some plans for that. And again, just highlighting some of the things that have changed programmatically along with, because I think enrollment, facilities, and programs, you kind of have to look at all those together and where we are and what we're trying to achieve. This is where Laura comes into the picture, has really led the charge in terms of literacy and Readers Writers Workshop approach to focus on the differentiation, personalization. We've brought the iPad initiative in this year, and the K2 Spanish Immersion program we started in 2014-15, and next year we'll complete that K5 transition by bringing that up to the 5th grade. So we're very excited about that. And then looking at the numbers, again, 2018-19, we're within that sort of 400 to 500 range, which many schools are in terms of elementary size. And I did show you, look at when WIS was constructed, what the population was at Hurlbut at that time, 627. As compared, it obviously has come down since that time. At WIS, you'll see the same thing, but the Chromebook initiative has influenced the learning. We added a 4th grade orchestra program, which the building really wasn't configured for when it was first built. That's added. We've worked through that. The new 5th grade teaming model and science program, we're enjoying that, how that's playing out. And then again, you can see that same trend, 571 when WIS came online, and we're down in the lower 500s. 507. Okay. And then at the middle school, we've added, STEM has really taken off with computer science, robotics, Project Lead the Way, but also on the literacy side, the writing portfolio. I know Dan has been a champion of the arts as well, and we've done things there. So again, we've come down from the low 600s to the high 500s here. But I think the message is, we've started to really level off, and we're not looking at a falling off a cliff type of decline anymore. The high school, National Blue Ribbon School, we've added the Science Research Lab, Effective School Solutions, another space. The Writing Center, another space. The 10th grade writing portfolio process is now a graduation requirement for the current freshman class and all the classes following. And we added very proudly our first community class in 2011 at the high school, following many years of doing that at the lower schools. And then at the high school, again, we're, actually, just go back to that. We went from 739. This is the one school that we've actually increased since the WIS was built, 800 students. And so, just bring you back full circle. For any questions, I decided against putting the picture of the burning Hurlbut. I didn't want to call it burning questions, but you might have some burning questions now, and I figured it would be a good place to stop.
I just have a quick question about the senior center. So you said that the senior center moved in 2008. What approximately, how much square footage is that?
I think it's at least.
You can get back to me.
Well, I think it's at least the equivalent of 5 classrooms.
5 classrooms.
If you're thinking a classroom plus the all-purpose room,
Yeah.
it's been reconfigured, so turn it back would require work to be
Michelle's
done
got
there.
it.
10,000 square feet. Thank you.
6, close.
Yeah. Yep, so some of that type of information in the Phase 1 study, which we'll talk about next. We'll get to that.
Okay. Quick question. Just because I didn't write down every number I saw up there, but the leveling off of the decline in enrollment, can you just talk a bit about that for 1 second? Is it leveled off completely? Are you sure, are you confident that it's stable?
I'm going to, I don't know if Louis
Yeah,
is-
I mean, I can speak to that a little bit.
Yeah.
We've been tracking that quite actively, first through one firm, and then last year switched to Malone McBroom. We ran them parallel to each other, as other board members have queried us on. Malone McBroom is an excellent choice. They work statewide. They have a very broad set of metrics that bring them to their enrollment projections. We're running at about a 2%, 1 to 2% decline rate now, which tracks with most of the area districts around us. The only growth districts you're seeing in Connecticut are the urban, and I have coined a new phrase, the metropolitan type districts like Greenwich are flat. Norwalk is growing at a 3-4% clip, but otherwise you're declining. So our declines now have leveled off. We're not going off a cliff, as had been the fear a while ago, but it is a leveling off. So we know, and Rich, you'd have this number. We're looking at over the next 5 years at a reduction of, it's a very small number of students. It's about 40 some, about 40 or 50 students against that denominator of, right now 2,300.
Right.
So, or several years ago, we truly thought we were going into a very rapid decline. We're not seeing that, and the very solid projections are suggesting that wouldn't be the case.
Thank you.
And all that's documented in enrollment reports that we can get to you.
Ken, thank you so much for putting
Sure.
this presentation together. When you were looking at compiling like the programmatic changes and the additions to what, the product that we're delivering, is there any way to just make that in a very simple presentation of the number of classrooms that are now used for these programs? Because I think members of the community, other boards, if they're sitting here looking at, sheer numbers of students, well, we should be able to fit that many students here now if we had that many then, but these programs are taking up space. Is there a way to quantify the number of
We've done
classrooms?
that, and Michelle Miller will have that. So,
Yes, so I think-
the other way to look, so this month is history. The first touch on history is thematic, the visuals, the programmatic piece. The Phase 1 got into a lot of that and has been updated some. So some of those, that real numeric, we will get to in the next presentation.
Right, yep.
If there are not other questions, I just want to applaud the group here, because Ken's busy doing a lot of things, and you have two principals here busy running buildings, but they took this on because they know how serious this question is of 3 sites versus 4 sites, and it came clear that even without the turnover on the board, it was essential we take a step back. And frankly, I came up with the concept, and then they made it happen, which is I said, let's make March history and make April the future, and they've been really working hard on this, and they need more of an audience for this. I think we want to talk about how to have this before the PTOs. I think the advisory committee needs to hear this. It's thematic, but juxtaposed to what you're about to hear, the Phase 1 update. It's critical knowledge and information as we move forward on some really big decisions. So I really want to thank the 3 of them for, I know you had a little fun with it, particularly Lisa's photo. Are you smiling, Lisa? So, anyway.
Just want to also thank June Curiano in the curriculum office for the legwork and helping collect information, as well as Craig for his technical support, which was, I think, extremely helpful in the process. So thanks for the opportunity.
So now we're going to shift gears, and Michelle, Rich will run you through the Phase 1 review. We did get that to you ahead of time because it's quite extensive. While they're coming up to the mic and all, I'll do a little quick introduction. Again, we want to make sure you had that PowerPoint ahead of time. Rich and Michelle will not go word for word through that PowerPoint. They're going to hit the themes on those pages. As I've said in different audiences, particularly around our budget PowerPoints, They are loaded with the kind of detail we teach our students not to use in PowerPoints. But for us, every one of these documents is in the public record. We want it to be able to stand alone when it's picked up. So that's why you have immense detail in these. And so while we're working on the transition over, that's sort of what you have here. To repeat, as of November 2017, this entire presentation was made to the board then. The Phase 1 study was a very comprehensive, nearly year-long look by Silver Petricelli. Michelle Miller is the carryover architect on that, and she can explain some of this. But again, I think it's critically important we go back, do this review, do this update on what that very comprehensive study entailed. It was a 10-year look. Most districts go through this periodically. It was the right time for Weston to go through this, and that's Phase 1, and you can't understand where we are with Phase 2 unless you understand Phase 1. Did I stall enough?
Yes.
Okay.
Perfect. Okay. So this is a summary. We kind of condensed the version down a little bit from when we initially presented back in 2017. We removed some of the master planning out just to focus on the 4 schools. So I'll take you through that. So we usually approach all these studies in a 3-part kind of phase. The first one is when we look at your facility conditions. We go in and review your buildings. We write narratives up on the buildings. We also come up with matrices that list all of the items that we see in your buildings that need to be addressed and apply costs to those. Then we also look at your program and utilization, what's happening in your buildings. And Malone and McBroom came in separately. We worked together, but not under the same contract with them for this project. So a lot of their work is in here, and I'm going to do my best to present on their work for that. Well, that's with the projections and everything. Then the third part is when we come in with some design ideas on how to remedy some of these issues, looking at the 4 schools here. So just to summarize, here is the 4 schools with Hurlbut, the pre-K through 2. That in 2017, when we did this, it was 429 students. The intermediate school at 110,000 square feet, 507 students. So you can see this all adds up, and we evaluated 573,486 square feet of your building. So to go over the facility conditions assessment, these are often referred to as capital needs, capital budgets. We usually hand these off to people like Rich and Joe so that they can plan their capital investments over the next 10 to 20 years. And just so you know, the facility conditions, we prioritize them, 1 through 4, 1 being the highest priority, meaning those are items you should address in the now, whereas number 4 goes up to about 10 to 20 years out. And I'm going to explain some of this in more detail. So starting with Hurlbut here, this is a summary sheet that we've created. Just have a laser on it. I think it does. Yeah, okay. So you can look up here. We have some building facts at the top, the years they were built. Here, this is us evaluating your program. You can see this in more detail throughout, but this would address the question of which classrooms are being used for what. So some of the green here you would see is specials, whereas the yellow is the general classrooms. But here you can see that wing of the building, the senior center, is called out in gray. Additionally, you'll find some more information here. We list some of the projects we believe that are in the top priority. And we also list all the total of your costs here and some other, and break the priorities from 1 to 2 on the side there. So Hurlbut, being one of your older buildings, does have a good amount of work it needs at $10,583,000. Now you can see, as I was trying to explain about the priorities, you'll see here priority 1. That's going to be an immediate issue, and I think I know what that is. It's just about getting ventilation into a boiler room, simple things like that. And then priority 2, you'll see that those start to build up. Priority 3, and then 4, you'll see that that's half of your total almost right there, and that's going to include your roofs, which are out. And here you can see how we break it up into each category: site, exterior, interior, plumbing, mechanical, and electrical. And within the study, you'll see these spreadsheets. They're pages long where you can get much more detail what these items are. And often they can be very simple things that Joe already has on their list of things to address, whereas other things they might not have known and now can prepare for. Moving on to the intermediate school. Again, this is a similar summary sheet that you can see. The intermediate school, being your newer building, has much less needs. Priority 1 included that knee wall that has actually been fixed already, and some other items. Yes, priority 4 in each one is has LED lighting in it, so there's also recommendations for what you could do, and so it doesn't mean that you have to, but about 400,000 of that is LED lighting. There's also the roof. I'm looking at the wrong one. In priority 1, it was the cafeteria doors and adding gym doors into your gym. So you can see most of the budget is in the electrical, which is that, again, that recommendation for 400,000 in LED lighting. Moving on to the middle school, which has taken the lead in needs here. I'll explain some of that there. So again, there's small things here which had to do with emergency lighting, so nothing too big. In priority 2, there's bathrooms. Priority 3, we have replacing ceilings. Priority 4, we have a roof, air conditioning, and again, LED lighting. But you can see there's some hefty amount in your exterior and interior work and your mechanical work. A lot of the equipment is aging, and therefore we have a pretty high price tag of over $17 million of work here. Your high school. This one was a little more interesting. You know, when I first got there, I thought it was a brand new building, and then you get to the back of the building, and it's still kind of stuck in the 60s, so there's some dollars associated with that. You can see that there's actually some exterior work here, but again, a big portion of that is the roof at over $5 million to replace your roof. I think it's still quite a ways out. But then we have a pretty high mechanical and interior number, and that kind of addresses that back half of the high school. So here we have $9.5 million. So in total, we have $38.7 million of work to address, and it is a 10-year facility condition assessment. And while these numbers seem large, they're not different than many other districts. They're going to get the same type of numbers with your older aging buildings require needs. So now moving on to utilization, enrollment projections, and programming. Here we at Silver Petrocelli begin to look at what is in your existing buildings and begin to look at that programming. This portion is your main core classrooms at 27%, and this is an example for Hurlbut, by the way. And then you have your specials, you have your special ed, which is larger, and you'll see actually at all of your schools, special ed is larger at the Hurlbut and starts to get a little bit smaller as they work their way through. And then this is your media center, and we consider that your core learning spaces. And then your gymnasium, cafeteria, administration areas is your school support. And then you have your building support, which is your circulation and your boiler rooms, bathrooms, all the supporting pieces of your facility. So we did evaluate that for each school. But now I'm moving on to the Malone and McBroom portion of the project, so please bear with me. I'll do my best to explain their work. Okay, so here is...
Before you move on, I have
Sure,
a question.
absolutely.
One of the things I hadn't noticed before is that 14 of the $17 million facility condition price tag for the middle school was really priority 3 and 4, which surprised me. I thought there would be more immediate needs.
I think a lot of what you're seeing in the 3s are going to be code type of issues. In an older building, they're not meeting today's accessibility codes, so it's door clearances, bathrooms. There's a lot of that here, and we probably called it a 3, which can be, sometimes it's difficult for us to put a number on it, I'll tell you that. It's kind of subjective. So I think that's probably what you're looking at. There might, there's not necessarily big critical needs that need to be addressed immediately, but these are things that come up. And as you do building projects, you'll need to address those code issues. As you spend a certain amount of money, you have to address ADA type of issues.
So can you clarify, out of the $38 million price tag for over the 4 schools, how much of that is critical? And I know you have phased into 4 different categories, but you said you had like $400,000 for LED lighting.
Mhm.
I'm going to wager a guess and say that the schools can continue to operate without LED lighting, and therefore
Correct.
that $400,000 could effectively never be spent. So what percentage of that $38 million number would you classify as things that we could simply choose not to do?
I can't just answer that right now without going through it exactly, but I can do that easily, you know,
Yeah,
just
Ri-
start
Rich-
adding the
Rich,
priority
you might
ones
have,
and twos.
yeah.
So one of the ways when we talked about how to develop the capital budget going forward, we gave that number of around $850,000 a year. So putting aside the middle school, since that's kind of the focus about larger projects, if we pull out certain buckets, so roofs and LED lighting make up about $6.5 million of that $21.4 million. So the roofs are really slated for the very end of those 10 years. The LED lighting is really, you could or you couldn't do it. It's not necessarily a have to do it. The playground at North House, which was fundraised, is included in that. There are oil tanks and other fiscal year 20 items that are included in that. The senior center is actually, repairs to the senior center are included in that as well. There's about $1.4 million of non-capital items in that $21.4 million budget. So that's actually just what you'd have as normal operating preventative maintenance expenses. It could be anything from painting. It could be anything from small plumbing repairs, things like that. And then air conditioning that was actually put in when they started the study, the split systems that you see at Hurlbut. So if you pull all that out, you get to about $8.6 million of things, excluding the middle school, that we should do within the next 10 years.
8.6.
8.6 million. So that roughly about $860,000 a year over 10 years.
And the other 30 million is?
Well, that's pulling out the middle school. So you're looking out at about
Okay.
$21.4 million. So putting the middle school aside, $21.4 million, you're going to do about 8.6 over the next 10. The big bucket that kind of bridges that difference is your roofs and your lighting, because you're not going to have a roof in your typical project. So the roof at the high school is going to cost about $6 million in today's money. So that's not going to be a normal capital budget expenditure, but there's about 8.6 million of items that you should do over the next 10 years. And there are things from boiler replacements, like the South House boiler, the East House boiler. There's flooring repairs at the WIS that should be done. There's other mechanical items and bathroom repairs both at the high school and Hurlbut as well. Those are the things that you're going to see over the next 10 years.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. I don't want to go into this discussion with just the foregone conclusion that we're going to spend $38 million. So I think we need to have a better understanding of the breakdown
yeah.
of that number.
Well, we do have that, and I guess another way to frame this, and Rich, correct me if I'm wrong, is the facility committee rightly has been saying right now, especially with the board turnover, what's our multi-year long-range capital need plan? That's what this is. This is saying over the 10-year period, from expert architectural and engineering looks, here's what you need to do just to keep these 4 buildings operating safely and effectively. Then it's planning out what you may do when. It's saying that, the total analysis is that, but then you have to prioritize within it as to what happens. But we do have that long-term multi-year plan, which then we look at to say each year on the capital side, working with you, what do we bring forward, what can we afford, and it may be you don't go to that 38, but that's saying, that's that full range of needs, some more critical than not. But that's that analysis we have been doing. I don't know, Rich, would you clarify?
I think also I just pulled out the packet from the feasibility phase 2, the update that you gave back in February, and I think it would be helpful to add the different priority levels in this template, only because when I look at the high school, 70% of your recommended cost of $9.5 million, 70% of that is in priority 4. So I agree. I think that your phase 2 update that you gave back in February, I think it could have been a bit more detailed in terms of the number breakdowns, in terms of the different levels of priority.
Yeah. And Bill, I appreciate your explanation. Either I'm not making myself clear or I'm not understanding what's being said. But, I'm hearing $400,000 for LED lighting, and I'm saying that we need to have the conversation about saying we are never going to spend that money. That's $400,000 we are never going to spend. We are never going to install LED lighting in the schools. How many other things on this list fall into that bucket? And so therefore, what is the true number?
Well, that's through the board deliberative process. So every district, if they're smart, gets this kind of analysis, and you did it back last year, 2 years ago. Very exhaustive, 10-year plan, what's needed, and then you go through and analyze that. Because frankly, I can flip that around. Some area districts to get a larger result for their dollar have actually come in with a lighting adjustment, because you can see a real boost in the quality of the learning environment simply by the LED, plus you have an electrical savings. So, but you get through that discussion in a deliberative process through your facility committee. So, and indeed, that list is, you know, Rich has reduced what you're seeing here. Again, we're in a review point. We're saying, let's just get up, review what the Phase 1 study told you back 2 years ago. We've done a listing that Rich has brought to the facility committee to say, here are all those items from here, and then year to year prioritize. You then have the discussion about whether LED should be in there or not. But you do that relative to that entire list year to year. I'm not, so nobody here is saying go out and you have to go out and spend that money, as opposed to here's that multi-year analysis of need, and then year to year with a multi-year look, you're planning what you can do or not. And LED, for example, may become more immediate, or it just keeps getting pushed down the list if you'd rather not do that. I'm not sure.
Yeah, no, that makes more sense. It's just, it's, I would imagine when we commission a study like this, it is going to be the list of every single possible thing that could, and I'm saying could and not should, that could be done in the building. And at that point in time, we have to start making some value judgments about what it is that we are actually going to do. Like, I don't think there's anything in any 4 of our schools that you didn't find, that didn't show up in this report. I think that this is probably the most comprehensive that you could have gotten.
Which is what you need, and there are 2 big buckets in this analysis. There's I just want to be clear. Somebody may, you know, facility conditions, which is this, and then new design hopes and wishes. But it's saying from a facility condition standpoint, and I don't think that Silver Petroleum just threw everything in they saw. I think they did use some judgment as to what's most critical, thus the prioritization. But again, it's saying, you know, and then it's year to year analyzing for this year, but with a multi-year look. I mean, there's no work we do with you as administration that isn't multi-year. We bring you year-to-year plans, but that's with a multi-year look. So it'd be the same on this.
So would it be possible, like, when we received our capital budget for discussion this year, it was a 3-year tranche. If we have this 10-year forecast, is it, you know, and using Rich's logic to get to the 850, is it possible for us to see a 10-year plan that gets us to this 850 with, like, then the information of what was essentially, like, excluded, and so we can kind of have a working document? I think to Dan's point about being able to have the items completely laid out for us to have those discussions.
So one of the things that was asked at the last facility meeting was to develop a 10-year outlook. So that's what we're working on now. It'll really be a 10-year outlook on the 3 schools, kind of putting the middle school aside. And then have a separate one for the middle school, and then at central office. So really, what we'll end up doing is we'll show a 10-year outlook for the 3 schools primarily. That'll get you to that roughly 850, 860 number. You'll have a separate bucket that'll identify larger ticket items that wouldn't be a part of a typical annual capital budget, which is primarily just roofs. So we'll flag when those roofs really do need to look at to be replaced, which is really towards the end of those 10 years. And then it'll be a question about how do we look at the middle school. So we'll bring that forward probably in a couple months to the facilities committee so that they can see what that 10-year outlook will be. But you're going to have movement as things shift over a course of 10 years. You're going to have some things that move up or move back. So it will be more of a dynamic list as opposed to a static list.
We have had a 10-year. Last time we went through this exercise, and you get it, and you see all these projects on there, then you have to really pull reality into it, because things can change on the drop of a dime, and a boiler will trump you know, a window replacement or whatever. But it just gives you a good roadmap of what it is. And as you know, in past years we've tried to be very, very cautious financially about the capital budgets that we presented, and it's clear, not only just in Weston but everywhere, that $300,000 or $500,000 is a drop in the bucket to the needs of the facilities. So you really need to be much more detailed about what it is. And we did ask Rich to go out and put it together in a picture so that people could see what this actually will translate to.
sorry, before you move on to enrollment, I had more of a basic kind of.
I don't think the mic's on.
Okay, sorry. Just a background question for you before you move to enrollment. So I looked at your website, and I can see all of your architectural experience and the schools that you've built, the additions that you've constructed. Truly beautiful work. Where I'm coming at it from with this feasibility study, could you speak a little bit about your experience and how often have you done an analysis like this? Because I think it's very different to come up with numbers this large and have the potential for a project that is architecturally minded, which maybe where your true expertise lies, versus kind of a comprehensive independent study of what our needs are in the district. Maybe you can speak to your experience in that area, or...
Yeah, let me say one thing, just so the board's here, that we settled on Silver Petroleum through a competitive RFP process. So, and Rich may speak to that a little bit before Michelle answers, but I think you should speak to the broad range. But an RFP was let for a comprehensive analysis such as this, so multiple firms competed for this
all
work.
by architectural firms?
Rich, why don't you speak to it? I mean,
So they were all by architectural firms. Most of them did pair with a demographer. So in this case, Silver Petrocelli joined with Malone and Broom. I believe there was either 5 or 6 that bid. And at the time, we had a bid review committee. Ellen was actually on the bid review committee as well. It really came down to 2, and of the group, the leader by far was Silver Petrocelli.
And yes, our firm has worked on schools for over 25 years, and we've done countless studies. I've been there for over 6 years, and I've probably worked on about 20 just like this. It's actually the main thing that I do in the office.
And we can get you the particulars on the RFP, but it was not just architectural design, but it was a broad engineering look. So it was an attempt at a very comprehensive look, because we need that, every district needs that. But we could, given the turnover on the board, we could make sure you have that as to how we arrived at this firm and as the body.
And I probably should have said also, it wasn't just me that went out to the buildings. I'm with engineers and electrical engineers, plumbing engineers, so everyone's looking at it, and we're all coming up with estimates together based on our experience.
Rich, you mentioned that you were not going to do the tenure study for the middle school. Why are we excluding the middle school?
It's not that we won't do the middle school. We're going to kind of have it as its own separate bucket. If we are going to renovate a school, the majority of those proposals have been related to the middle school. So the middle school alone, if you were to spread that over 10 years, is going to be more than just your capital budget for the other 3 schools put together. So the way we're going to tier it is we're going to have a 10-year outlook on the 3 schools. We're going to have separate buckets for the larger items like the roofs and when they need to be replaced. And then we're going to treat the middle school separately. So if the middle school stays as is and we don't build a new school or we don't go to 3 sites, this is what you're looking at over the next 10 years for the middle school, whether it be boilers or electrical work or flooring or bathrooms.
Okay, so it will be included.
It will be. It'll just be
Okay.
its separate own little entity.
Okay. And then at what point, because I'm trying to find kind of in your step process on what's to be expected for then phase 2, when are we going to see ROIs on any of this?
See what? I'm sorry.
Just your return on investment. So when am I going to see, shared efficiencies for electricity? This is what it would go to when, we
So
were
you're
to
not
move.
likely going to have any savings in electricity because you're going to be taking non-air conditioned space and likely turning it
I'm
into
talking 100,000
air-conditioned
feet right
space.
now. Yeah, but just
At
overall.
some point, the committee is going to have to discuss what, if any, efficiencies there are, and if they are, they're likely going to be focused on the staffing. And what's important to remember is if you make a staffing efficiency, it is a one-time budget efficiency, and then it becomes cost avoidance going forward.
So
Yeah.
you're saying that if we expanded Hurlbut, and if, I'm just saying hypothetical, we expanded Hurlbut, we took over Senior Center, and we put more students in that building, that we would not have cost savings
So you would potentially
other
have-
than administrative?
Well, what you would potentially have is if you have a staff savings where Maybe you have one of each in the current configuration, and then you kind of merge them and you have one.
Yeah.
I don't want to give a specific example to make anybody nervous, but what would happen is in the budget in which that happened, you might reduce that one position. So you have the credit in your budget in that 1 year. The following year, you're not reducing anything, so you don't have a credit in your budget. What you have is just cost avoidance. So from a budgetary perspective, you get a budgetary savings 1 year from any of those efficiencies, and then it becomes cost avoidance going forward, so you don't
Okay.
actually have a budget reduction.
But,
in those
yeah,
outer
but,
years.
Rich, I think, one thing that needs to be done, though, is that whatever configurations we arrive at, there needs to be a pro forma operating budget attached to it,
Yeah,
because that's
it-
part of the analysis.
Yeah,
Right.
no, for sure. And
Right.
again, let me go back to the structure
Yeah.
here. March is
Right.
history.
Yeah.
And phase one, because this was a major endeavor by the district, and if we did not have the phase one, we would be at sea. We would not know how to invest in any capital issues at all. So very smartly, the district let the RFP, got this major study done. We want to get the board caught up and the community caught up on that study. And then next month, we'll begin giving feedback on the various phase two ideas. And you're going to get a lot more than you anticipated. You're going to get a pretty robust analysis as to whether or not you can have a combined secondary site. You're going to get, and then you'll have that sense at the elementary end. Then you're still a ways from, I think, ROIs or pro formas or all the rest. My hunch is, as of the end of that April meeting, you're going to have a pretty good handle on, do you want to keep going down the three-site path or not? And what are those remaining questions, some of which may be ROIs or pro formas, or what are the real savings? But that's, that's the April, set of information. I mean, we're trying to get you caught up on the phase one, because that's so fundamental. And then we'll get into the phase two in the next month.
Yeah, and I wasn't here for the planning of phase two, otherwise I would have made this recommendation. I just don't see how you can recommend to go into detail on 3 specific configurations without seeing performance.
But we're not recommending that. Let me be really clear, and maybe, Michelle, you can speak to this. What's very typical is the specifications you see are to give us guidance and understanding, but they could be very different from where you land. So I'm going to be very specific. Again, I have to talk about Greenwich. Greenwich just opened the new Lebanon School, a $40 million investment. 2 different architectural firms were involved in that. One, and so particularly bid on that. So we're at the point where there was a very preliminary analysis to get a rough cost sense. Then it's rebid and all the rest for what that final plan would be. We're a couple years away from that. All we're trying to do, if you think New Lebanon School 4 years ago, and it just opened up, we're in that 4-year ago phase of just being to rough out what are options, what are ideas to get you in the ballpark. Then you as a board are going to determine, do we want to be in that ballpark? Can we roughly afford it? And then if you say we can, they're going to have to bring the community in at that point. Then you're getting into that much more fine-tuned set of analyses. But we're still a little bit away from that. I mean, Michelle, would you comment on that from kind of other communities and perspectives?
Yes. As I said, I've worked on numerous studies. Sometimes in the end we'll get the job and sometimes we don't. And even when we get the job, it changes drastically. The point to capture usually is what the overall cost is going to be. Not necessarily, we don't ever really do pro formas. Maybe occasionally that happens, but in my experience that hasn't. It's usually what it's going to cost the town to build the project, and that number is usually what wants to be held, even if the project itself changes a little. As long as you capture the space that needs to be built, therefore the cost, that's what happens. But it can morph and change numerous times throughout a project.
Yeah, so I mean, I would recommend, let us try and get through phase one, get you caught up on phase one.
Yeah.
As we move into phase two, because Michelle has been doing a lot of work, I mean, and then let us present to you on the phase two, because phase two, you're now going to get two big insights. You're going to get the insight on that secondary school idea, and those of you who are concerned that we're ignoring the big elementary, we're going to bring you a whole lot of analysis on that, all within that same price tag, frankly. So you're almost getting double the work that we anticipated. So we've listened since that last meeting, and Silver Cicelli has said we will come back, not just with the 3 sites as it relates to a combined secondary, not touching Hurlbut, but they'll come back and now say, what would it entail to do an 800-student elementary at Hurlbut? Both with rough cost estimates, can you space all the rest? But I guess the aim here is let us catch you up on phase one, because that's so big and comprehensive, and then, let's then, come back to you in April with the phase two piece. Is that a fair?
Correct. Yeah.
Yeah.
Can I just ask you one other background question? I imagine when you had talked, you were here on site and went around to all the different schools. So I imagine you probably met with administrators and staff and that sort of thing. How much of what's in, particularly your priority list number 3 and 4, were ideas and concepts originated from our staff that was, aspirational kind of, it would be nice to have, versus things that you independently found, on your own that you thought were necessary? Or is that hard to gauge?
Most of that isn't actually in the facility condition. When I meet with your administration, we're talking more about program and what they'd like, and that will be in the design phase more.
Okay.
However, we did walk around with facility staff, and maybe they would point something out to us or something, and we might pick that up, but
Okay.
nothing like a big wish list.
Again, think of there are two big pieces to phase one. Facility conditions is really, that's the engineers, the architects saying, if you want to have safe and secure, healthy buildings, that's the conditions. The next part was, okay, dream a bit. What would you like to have? So that's where that piece would come in, and that was just very tentative. Now with this idea of can 3 sites work, that, you dig into that a little more. So actually, Michelle's been doing some of that work. So when you get to phase 2, very preliminary cut, can Weston handle 3 sites and all what it wants, you will get some of that good feedback. If that, but I would recommend we try and get through the phase 1. I would suggest we sprint through the enrollment piece.
Okay.
It's here.
That's fine by me.
And because and I think get to the rest. Unless the board wants detail on the enrollment, I think it's here. It's very well documented. Important thing for the board to know, many other districts have started to layer in enrollment analysis to these sorts of studies. That had not happened in Weston before. So it was very important that that was a subcontract within the larger contract to bring Malone and McBroom in to do that.
Okay, so here's the population in Weston. It's slowly actually increasing. Births, however, are dropping. They look at that. There's slight increases that are actually tied into the kindergarten class coming in next. Housing sales are still fairly low since 2008, I think. Historic enrollment, so you can see that peak year when the intermediate school was built, and it's just slowly on a slow decline here. These are the historic enrollment, watching the cohorts move through. So I'm blitzing through it. With all their information that they begin to gather, they get their projections primer, basing that on births, home sales, history, and the kindergarten data. So then they give you your 10-year projections by grade here. So you can see that Hurlbut is projected to increase slightly and then remain stable at around 470. The intermediate school goes around to 460. The middle school is around 500, and the high school will bottom out around 700. Capacity. So student capacity isn't set in stone. Again, it's based on your programming that you have in place. So they begin to review that based on some of the initial review that we have done. They used our programming plans and the information we gathered with your administration, and then they began to look at your grade level instructional classrooms. And then they also put a flex onto that, which would include classrooms that we're actually looking at, these 2 classrooms right here, I think might be these 2 or on the other side. They start to include rooms like this that could be set up as a classroom. They would begin to set desks up in there and kind of pack people in. They want to know what your overall capacity is. So you can see, actually, I'll go back. That chart at the bottom there starts to list your maximum capacity at Hurlbut with today's programming in place is 513. The intermediate school would be 648. The middle school, 634, and the high school at 900. But again, this is with every classroom packed. It's taking away some special ed classrooms and other, your art and music would remain, your general classrooms remain, but other classrooms start to begin purposed into general classrooms. And again, this chart shows that also. It shows the capacity over, the percentage of capacity over the years with the slow decline. And again, this chart does the same thing. It kind of shows you if you did pack those classrooms in, how many seats would be available with these projections.
And what is like industry standard for like target capacity for a school?
I typically see people using 90 to 95 as your maximum.
Yeah.
You don't really ever want to go over that. I think 90 is a safer one, but typically 95, you know.
Yeah, 90-95 is sort of my understanding from multiple districts.
Yeah.
This becomes a very important chart, and we can explain this more going forward. And also, if the board has an interest in really digging into the enrollment, we can get Mike Zuba back to present to you, because that's very deep, sophisticated work using a variety of economic metric models and all the rest to arrive at that. So I don't want to just skim over that, but I think we should get Mike Zuba in to meet with the board of your question. The industry standard is about 95%. But a couple things I want to underscore that Michelle said, and you and fix it if I get it wrong.
Okay.
But part of this is taking a lot of space we now use not as classrooms and putting seats and desks in all those rooms. So to do that, you would eliminate some of the things that we've placed high educational value on in Weston. So instead of having freestanding classrooms and learning places for certain disciplines, and Ken can speak to that, you would then do push-ins and all the rest in that type of thing. So that just, we can go to that in a second. But even here, even if the industry standard is 95%, you can see if you shut a building, there is no way to fit any of that other building into the space. You can't do it. And part of that, when we had the sewage issue here, and we just couldn't take this building automatically fitted in. So you just can't do that. That's why the three-site look is important, but it requires all this careful work, that we just can't shut a building and move students just into that and have it work. I don't know, Ken, if some of those spaces, just because it's been a recurring question, what is our right size? And
Right, just an example of a few different types. You could end up with art on the cart. You could have health. They would not have their own rooms, or Spanish, world language. Would be a few of the examples right off the top of my head.
The makerspace.
Yeah, but to that point, I think that's the important information that we have to put out there, because our educational program has fundamentally changed over the past 10 years. And with those changes comes a different need for space. So I think what we could benefit from seeing is a list of programmatic changes and the space use associated with that, so that when we talk about going back to the 2004 model, whatever the case may be, we know what we're losing. We're losing, maker spaces, we're losing video studios, we're losing these things, because that's the context.
so in a way, you'll start getting answers, because to introduce Phase 2 a little bit, when you hear at the end of April on Phase 2, for example, Michelle has looked at, if you went to an 800-student elementary school, here are the additional pieces you would have to build or reconfigure if you want to hold on to some of those things we've valued educationally. So you'll begin to get some sense of that. Again, we're not, at the end of April, you're not voting on 3 sites, boom, we're done. All you're going to be thinking about is, do we want to continue that conversation? But you'll get some feedback on that. I mean, we'll bring in, if you want an 800 elementary school at Hurlbut, here are the kinds of things you're going to have to build if you want art separate, if you want, a full, robust PE program, things like that.
Yeah, I think tonight, with the first presentation, really trying to just highlight from a qualitative standpoint that programs obviously go hand in hand with grade configurations, building configurations, and enrollment. So I think that point has come through tonight, which I'm happy to see. And I know that down the road, we also get into ed specs. This is, I think, further down the road, where specifically, what do you need to run the particular programs? But, I think I'm happy to provide information related to, what are the programs now, which I tried to highlight here tonight, but be more specific about, what it is we need. And also, I think it'll also be helpful from a curriculum committee standpoint, what are we dreaming of as well, which you might want to consider in this process.
And some of that dreaming is then in Phase 1. Maybe if you could continue, Michelle, because you're about to go into, here's what those hopes and aspirations were for within Foresights.
Yes, so the second part of what we've done was programming, and this is where I meet with your administrators. I've met with all 4 of them sitting over there. I went through, what's working in your school, what's not working, what do you need, and we try to bring this forward into the third phase of the design. And I will say under the phase 2, I've kind of revisited all that, and a lot of the same things are being said, so it's kind of reassuring to hear it all again. So with all the information we had learned, we began to make our recommendations in order. Weston Middle School was the obvious first. It had a lot of facility needs and a lot of programming needs. And this was the school that should be addressed next. Hurlbut and the high school was a kind of a tougher decision. They both have a similar cost need and facility-wise, but the high school could use improvements to that, the back half of the building. And then Hurlbut should also receive some focused improvements. And then, obviously, the intermediate school needs limited improvements. So next we get into the school design options, where we'll focus in on the middle school, high school, Hurlbut, and Weston Intermediate School. Again, there was some overall site master planning options, but I kept those out to keep the focus here. So here's our program plan for the middle school. This is what's in place today. So you can clearly see the light yellow is your classrooms. The darker yellow are special ed type classrooms. Here's the media center where we are now. Here's your science classrooms, which are stuffed in the middle there that are really not working well at all. Your music classrooms, which are also very outdated, and the orchestra classroom has to be way down over here because it's the only space available for that. Here's your nice newer technology wing here. Their old gym, your new gym, and then the pool is below there. So some of the priorities we've all identified was your infrastructure, improving the HVAC, electrical, and plumbing. Science, getting new labs with prep rooms. Improving your art and music spaces. Improving your gym and locker rooms. And then also improving the administration and entry. So just to take away that color. And now, as I move to the next slide, you're going to see gray for where we have renovations and a terracotta color for where additions would go. So this was our option number 1, where we began to create a STEAM type wing. So building your new science classrooms over next to the technology piece and demolishing a lot of G-wing there. It opens up the courtyard and kind of eliminates some of the less quality classrooms over there. Additionally, your 2 gyms would be renovated. There's an addition at the front door, bringing stairs in more of an enclosed space in the building with an elevator so that you're not dealing with those exterior concrete stairs, and increasing some of your administration space to make all of that work a bit better. Additionally, we begin to demolish the science classrooms, leaving a portion of it to become your new orchestra classroom close to your music classrooms, and also getting rid of that little corridor here to improve the size of those computer rooms. And then over here, we were proposing to realign the corridor in order to expand your bathrooms on the ends here. They're both incredibly small and couldn't really be modified in place, and we felt this would be a more appropriate layout. It also gets you a special ed classroom here and an alcove for your lockers that you can see better there. The art rooms are highlighted here. We've brought some daylight into them with the addition of this courtyard. And again, it was demolishing the kind of quasi-stage that's there and building a newer one similar to what's at the intermediate school, so you would have a cafetorium. So just looking at the site, here's your existing, and then you would see the additions there in the terracotta. It would require, shifting the ball field a little bit. Now that we know a little more information about the wetlands here, we might have to rethink an addition exactly in that location. It might need to cant a little or something. We also created a barrier back here from the play area and the parking, just a little more space. So the estimate, this is where this one gets a little messy. We have a lot of cost range here. We don't typically have this in a lot of our studies at this scale, but this one had a lot of factors. We have interior demo, like when the courtyard demo we kind of figured would be a little more. We have different ranges of renovation costs. Typically, if you're going to do a full renovation, it's around $350, but there's some areas like the gym where we're just doing finishes, so we used lower costs on that. And then for new construction, we're typically using the 500 per square foot. The 300 was for a prefab thing that's in a different portion that we're not looking at. So the estimates then list the portions of the facility conditions that we didn't address within the renovated areas. So it gets a little messier. We're taking portions of it out, only bringing 7 million forward. And again, based on what we just discussed, you might not take everything with that. So then I break it out between the science, the art, music, the gyms, and then the entry piece, and that totals around 30,330,000. And then if you add the leftover facility conditions on top of it, it would be about 37.4 million. So we've come up with a second option just to kind of take a step back a little and take it down. This option has a smaller addition at the front, or the thinner stair, and just less of an administration addition. Instead of building an addition for science, we could renovate G Wing, break up the classrooms to create larger rooms and make them into clabs. That would require a lot of work to break up the slab and get plumbing in and get that retrofitted to be science classrooms. Again, your locker rooms and your gym remain here. Some of this gets readdressed to special ed that we relocated from G Wing over. And then again, we're showing the same thing at A and B Wing. And then different option for the stage to be on the other side there, and kind of renovating the stage out of there. So this one, you'll see less of a footprint being added on there. And then the cost drops down to 26.2 million for that. And then again, bringing the 7.2 million at 33.4. Option 3 is a little different. A lot of discussion came about the Board of Ed being relocated into this building. So we did a proposal putting them over at this end. So we fit that out based on their needs here. But to do that, you need to build additional classrooms to support the middle school. And it would require putting additions on the ends here, which aren't ideal because it's pretty close to the road here. But that would get your teaming wings in. Additional things, science is over here now, a little bit different than it was. We're infilling these 2 courtyards with special ed rooms, and the music remains the same as we had proposed throughout. So this one, you'll see there's various additions all over, and and there's that actual prefab part. That was for if the bus building was relocated, maintenance. So this one comes in around 31.7 million. And again, that was more about looking at the Board of Ed relocating too. So now looking at the high school, here's that programming plan. This is the back half of the high school that has been somewhat unaddressed. I know little pieces have been worked on, some ceilings and some glass windows there. But the priorities here was to renovate this remaining building, expand Project Lead the Way space, and improve the music and create practice rooms. So it's a much simpler plan here. Again, all the gray highlighted is renovating the untouched areas. This gray area is currently the science office, and we talked about expanding that into Project Lead the Way to be across the hall from there. Here's your 2 science rooms, renovate those in place. And then this room was a little underutilized to convert that into practice rooms. This project would total, including the facilities conditions, at 18.8 million. Hurlbut, looking at this, you can again see the floor plan with your classrooms. You have your 2 small cafeterias here, your media center, administration, the small gym up here, and your second floor of North House has a lot of special ed and other classrooms up there. Your priorities are your gymnasium has poor HVAC system that's actually causing problems with the floor. Special education, you have some rooms that could be broken into smaller rooms to support those classes better, and then restroom renovations. So here's the plan, and then you can see the highlighted areas. So these were some options to renovate the gymnasium. Here's the classroom upstairs that could be broken up into different classrooms. Also, the bathrooms are highlighted throughout, if you can tell. And then over here, we have, again, another classroom kind of broken up for special ed. Oh. Right there. Sorry, but somehow that page is missing. And I can pull it out of here to tell you the cost. I'm sorry. That totals at 4.1 million, and bringing the facility conditions over, it would be 9.9 million. Sorry about that. The intermediate school. So some of the options here were to repair the gym and calf wall, which has been, I believe, has been addressed. Gym egress. You only have 2 doors in, and I know that they have issues getting students in and out, and technically from a code standpoint, there should be another door. So we recommended putting one in. And then also, some of your classrooms have interior doors that, although may be a good idea for, here's an example of it right here. For team teaching, it creates a sound issue, so this option eliminates those, repairs those walls, which are, we believe are done, and also adds those doors at the gym over here. So just some simple things. The project totals at 400,000, and then bringing the facilities condition in, it was 1.4. But again, we know that you've completed the gym and wall, the gym and calf wall. With that, that's the summary of the study, but really there's a lot more information right in here to kind of go through to get more detail.
You know, just a question. I think when you look at this, just practically speaking, what I took as the main takeaway here is that if we really wanted to renovate the middle school, right, it would be about a $30 million price tag, right?
Correct.
Because I think the design options for the other schools, I mean, just from a practical perspective, we would probably deal with just the facilities conditions on the other schools, which are what they are, plus a $30 million price tag for renovating the middle school. Is that kind of how I'm?
I was trying to find a way to summarize it, and you kind of just did, Tony. I would add the high school piece in that, though, because if you look at the 2 aspects of our campus that are most challenged, just from up to date or not, it's that aspects of the middle school and then that back half of the high school. And the rest, I think, is a facilities condition. And I think to bring history to the present, why it's so important, this was all done very comprehensively. Facility committee under Ellen's guidance has started to dig into it, and in part that big price tag led the board to say, let's step back. Are there other ways to think about this? Which led us to phase 2, which is, could you go to 3 sites, still have the same quality programming in Western, even better programming? I think the Mike Rizzo new observation is we want to make things better, and can do that. If cost is a factor, do it less. So you've got the facility conditions as a given, and then it is where beyond that you need to do work to really be quality, and it's middle school, and it's the back half of the high school. And that then said, well, let's think. So that's why, right there is why, at least initially in phase 2, concentrate on the 2 most expensive areas, middle school and high school. Can you focus your work there? That's where the secondary combined option came about. But that brings you up to speed, if that makes sense. And Rich, would you add?
I mean that's correct. I mean the middle school is largely a $30 million project, and then you have about $21 million of facility renovations at the other 3 schools, including things like roofs and LED lighting. Those are kind of like the 2 buckets that you're really looking at.
Just one more thing. Thank you, very much for this presentation. I think it was really helpful. Gave us a lot of background for those of us that weren't here the first time around. And this is just probably a background question that everyone else knows, except for maybe the 3 of us. I'm just wondering how you're fee structure is for this type of a project. Is it a capped amount, or are we paying hourly? Is phase one priced separately than phase two? That sort of thing?
I believe it's a capped amount. I'm not usually even, I don't do that part of this really.
Okay.
But I believe it's a capped amount.
Yeah,
We don't,
Rich
we
can
don't
speak.
charge hourly.
No, Rich can speak to that.
So they were two different contracts. So phase one, done and over with in fiscal 17, I believe it was. That was about $96,000, I believe. Phase two was an amount of $23,700, but there are hourly costs. So if you hit that threshold, Bill Silver will typically come to us and say, look, you're at that cap. If you want us to exceed it, you'd have to increase it by X.
Okay.
We are still under that cap, though.
Great, thanks.
Any other questions from you guys as far as reviewing the history?
Thank you.
So next up, we have our first review of the school start and end time survey. Bill, are you
Yep.
taking the lead on that one? Yeah. Meredith, can we get the lights on?
Yeah,
Thank you.
Dan's turning them on.
Thank you.
So you can blame your tall superintendent for what will be a very long meeting, because it was critical that we did what we just did for about a good 70 minutes or so, which was the history, get us all caught up. I would urge all of us to go back and review in detail the various PowerPoints that were provided, because those actually become good standalone documents. We had planned all along, before we needed to bring the history in on the whole facility and campus issue, to bring to you the first report on the survey that was done on school start and end times. So you received that Friday. I won't go through it word by word. There are about 21 findings from that survey that, with great help from Craig Tunks and Joanne Trabrowski, have put together for you. In April, we'll bring to you the full technical report. The main addition in the April report will be from the survey, very extensive narratives, probably, Craig, about 300 different responses, narratives, which we have analyzed into positive, negative, in between with themes. We'll bring that to you. We have a sense of that, so we can speak to that some tonight if you'd like. But I wanted to at least now give you, from the numeric, if you will, responses, what those resulted in. Without going page by page, just to review, now almost 2 years ago, the board said school start and end time is something we should be looking at, particularly from our priority as a community and with a healthy learning environment. Other districts across the country and communities are looking at this issue. It's substantially driven by the research coming out of largely medical research on sleep patterns, particularly for adolescents, and trying to adjust what is really historic early start times relative to those sleep patterns, and can they get shifted later in the day. A very small share of districts nationally have actually made the change, and even now with the medical science frankly piling up, there's no debate that from a sleep pattern standpoint, starting schools later for adolescents makes sense. The challenge are the logistics. And as you find in all kinds of research realms, medical, educational, otherwise, you have findings, and you then try and logistically make it work. So a number of districts in the area are looking at this, but even the last, say, several years of those districts have looked, only a couple have actually gone in and made the change. What we set out in the survey was to understand there are 4 major constraints. Let's take the medical research as a given. Not debatable, critically important, but then trying to understand logistically what can happen. And there are 4 major logistical areas that tend to appear. One is financial. The other is the scheduling in terms of transportation do you have an impact there? The other is extracurricular, co-curricular impact. In the lead there is athletics, but all of the extracurricular, co-curriculars tend to have an effect. And then there is traffic impact, different from transportation. That would be the district-controlled transportation, but then the traffic impact as you look at things. With those pieces, we designed a survey to get at that sum, but we really wanted to very simply say to employees and to parents, what's your level of interest in this topic? How important it is? How important is it to you? How do you feel about it? There's a lot of correlation on that. Those two questions, we want to understand that. And then ask, what do you see as your lead area of concerns if we were to go into this? What do you see as lead areas of benefits? And we had a good response rate. We kept the survey open for about a month. We tracked responses not by the content, but by how representative they were across the range of parents, the range of employees, and we were able to close the survey at the scheduled date knowing we had an overall good response rate, which, as I know here, is a little tricky to tease out, and we can speak to that technically if you want, but from the range of responses, again, grade level, school level, range of employees, we feel we had a pretty good handle on this. Very simply put, your parents, and not surprisingly, on a scale of 1 to 10, are rating at about the 2 level, 1 high, that this is an area they feels important to continue to look at, to continue to understand. Your employees, which is tracking with other districts on surveys, are more in the middle of the range at about a 4, but still on the positive end. Other districts have seen it more on the negative end, but at least on the positive end, saying this is something to pursue. You do get a little difference, and I just grouped it lower school and upper school. Lower is Hurlbut and Wiss. Upper school is the middle school and high school, just to keep it a little simpler in reporting out. You don't see much, really, and it's hard to know what's statistically significant, but you don't really see much difference, parent, upper, lower, or employee, upper, lower. So there is definitely an interest on the parent side to continue on this. Staff, mixed. The types of concerns that are raised, quite importantly with the parents, is really that idea of the extracurricular, the co-curricular, how to handle that. Some concern about what it might mean for commute times, especially for two families with two working parents, what it might mean for child care, either before or after school. But those really were sort of the main concerns you see in these findings. For your employees, you do see a significant share, and we looked at this two ways, not only just what are your top concerns, but we did a forced choice with employees around child care and transportation. And you saw there at least 50% of your employees saying that if you made this shift, they would have much more of a challenge with their commute, and they'd have a challenge with child care. And so we both did the overall ranking, but we did a forced choice there, knowing from other districts that would be likely an area to pay attention to. In terms of benefits, it tracks with the research. The parents largely saying they would see the sleep benefit, they'd see an overall wellness benefit, and the parents saying there would be an academic benefit. Interesting enough, and there's a difference there, your educators are saying you'll get the sleep benefit, you'll get the overall health benefit, but you probably won't see much of an academic benefit. And frankly, that's where the research is. Even Wilton, who's been one of the oldest on this change 10 years ago, they will say they've not seen much of a bump academically. That may be, like us, a very high-performing district. The opportunity for a change there is modest, but will say you see the benefit at the overall health wellness. I listed 21 findings here. Right there is all 21 in a brief summary. Can probe a little more in any way you want at this point. You will get in April that more full report. I would suggest, though it's a big topic, I think sooner than later we should talk with you as a board as to how much more we keep working on this for the near term versus, this is important to understand, becomes more of a long-term issue, and I have some definite thoughts on that. For the new board members, I do need to review for you that I was superintendent in Greenwich when this issue was considered, and right before I left, I kept this process alive, and Greenwich is now one of the few districts in the area that shifted. They shifted from a 7:30 start to an 8:30 start, so it is a living case study now a couple years into the full range of effects and all the rest. Very different community from Weston, but most districts in this area that are considering this are trying to pay attention to what Greenwich learned in the run-up to it and now in their second year of implementation. So I don't know, Craig, since you spent a lot of time with the data, if there's anything I missed, or others from the administration who've looked at this, anything you'd add in, or if that summary kind of does it. Well, not always, but, okay.
Go, Dan.
Well, I've got a bunch, so I'm going to let other people go first, so maybe you'll ask some of mine, and then I look like I'm taking up less time.
Oh, no. I just have a quick question. In terms of the way that the survey was positioned, it was the lower schools to be pushed out, correct? So going from an 8:30 start time to a 15, 20-minute push out start time. Just correct me.
Actually, no, I skimmed over that. That's the nub of this is I had recommended a while ago to the board is let's think about, instead of, some districts when they go into this say, let's look at the entire range of change. Everything from 5, 10 minutes literally all the way to an hour. Greenwich, took the leap at the high school from an hour. My recommendation, which we replayed in the intro, was that I said, let's focus on a modest change. Let's just analyze it there. So it's 15-minute for high school, and 20-minute for the elementary. And that was actually the view that we needed to do a 15-20. That lag was needed to make our current bus system work.
But
we made
out.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah,
So
everybody pushed out.
Yeah.
So high school delayed 15, elementary's delayed 20.
Yeah. So my question is, because I know that Wilton Elementary starts 9, correct me if I'm wrong, and like Saugatuck Elementary starts at 7:45 a.m., 7:50 a.m. So was there any conversation, because obviously we know that younger children wake up earlier, and just talking to some people in the district, that was one of the things that they had mentioned to me is my kids like up at 6 o'clock. I'm not going to wait till 9 o'clock for them to go to school. So are we open to exploring the idea of having the lower schools start earlier?
So as districts go into this and look at the entire range of options, they don't only look at pushing later, but they look at flipping. So that would be the flip. You're going to get, and it may be a discussion you want to get into, I'm not saying not, but often the reason you're right now not seeing many districts actually make the change is when they go all options, frankly, they get stuck. Because you then get into big debates that some elementary parents say, fine, I'll flip, others say, forget about it. And some say, go to 8:30 or not, even if you just pushed. So that's why in this approach, at least for starters, let's focus. Let's not do a flip. Let's simply do the 15-minute delay that gets us to the high school at 8 and the 20. But if you get into this more deeply and say 15-20 doesn't feel right, you want to just do a flip. But you'd have to go out and survey on that. We did not survey on that.
We did the first time.
You did?
We did.
Oh, okay.
So
What were those results?
and that's very important. There's a history on this
Yeah.
we're building.
And it was not an overwhelming slam dunk. There were not a lot of parents who thought it was just automatically you could send your young kids earlier because they're up and moving about. The converse of that was that the high school students were going later and later and later, and it backed up the end of the day with the athletics and everything else. And it was a trade-off that we didn't feel was the right thing to do.
In order to do the flip, you're going to have the 8:30 start time for the upper school, which is what's being problematic in looking at this pushback as
So
it
we
is.
did talk about it, and we did decide that the 20 minutes that we got, 25 minutes that we got, was well worth it in benefit for everyone without being punitive to any particular group. My elementary school kids would never have been bounding off the bus at 7, unless I rolled them out of the house. They would never go earlier. They were late sleepers, so it was not just an automatic.
And
Of course,
again, if
everybody-
you use Greenwich as a case study, it went at this for 2 years of planning. Flip was thought about, but it disappeared under parental pressure.
Okay.
And they actually came up with the most expensive option. They put everybody within about a 20-minute transportation window. So their transportation costs went up about $1.5 million per year.
We couldn't handle it. Kathy, you had a
Yeah,
question?
a question about, you mentioned that you began this survey and the exploration based on a modest change of 15 to 20 minutes. And I wonder about two things. First of all, I think the science does indicate, if I'm not correct, that it requires more than a 15-minute change in order to really see the benefits in health
It
for.
requires you to get to, there's this thought that for adolescents get to the 8:30. So it wouldn't be the 15:20 as much, it's where you get. So the view would be actually get 8:30 or later, is what the research would be
Right,
suggesting
so
for the
which
adolescents.
would suggest that in our case, that they start an hour later.
Well, 45 minutes later.
Right.
So it'd be pushing to 8:30.
That's right. So the question is, are we asking questions of our parents and staff because we want to keep things calm as we explore this? And is it worthwhile doing that if the benefits don't come to fruition based on a 15 to 20-minute change? In other words, if we understand that we really have to get adolescents to an 8:30 start in order for them to feel those health benefits, and I think we know that, but we're a little bit, cautious about going out the door with that full hour change, which I respect and understand. I would wonder whether we ought to rethink that.
Well, no, it's a very good question, and there was a very active discussion, and I put on the table, I would recommend if you're going to consider this, let's analyze it at the 15:20. Let's analyze it at a modest approach. And as you look at area districts who try and get to 8:30, they're actually now falling back to 8 o'clock because the end of school implications are pretty extreme for most districts that have gone for that hour. So the view was, at least in Weston, let's explore whether a moderate approach is the wise one. Because frankly, from a medical standpoint, there is the research. From a medical standpoint of it implemented in many educational settings, we do not have that research. We do not have research from multiple educational settings on does the sleep difference have the hoped for effects. So that's where you're now seeing, and I can tell you where the other superintendents are grappling with this, that it's getting stuck at going all the way out to 8:30. Because of a lot of the pushback. So the thought was, we could revisit it later, but at least ask the question around, do we have the appetite for the modest adjustment, building on the history of an adjustment, because it moved to the 7:45, can we at least get it to 8?
Right.
And see?
So
Yeah, and can you?
Yeah.
If I could just add, if we go back to 2009, when we had the modest adjustment from 7:25 to 7:45, there was even though it's a short period of time, it did have a significant impact because we also had made some changes with transportation that shortened the runs. So for those students, there was definitely a positive benefit to that. And when we look at a modest change with this proposal, there is, I think, the context of you're looking at in this 10-year period a 35-minute cumulative benefit by doing, a couple phases of incremental change, which could have benefits. And then Bill alluded to other districts. Richfield had a very comprehensive initiative 2-3 years that stalled because, quite frankly, they were looking to go till 8:30. And, for some parents who are looking for modest relief from a 7:25 start time, we ended up stalled at a 7:20. I live in Richfield, so we ended up going back the board because it was so controversial, so difficult to manage the logistics. No change took place at all.
Yeah, and I can. It's some of it's public record, but Darien, New Canaan, Westport, all have tried, and it's basically stalled. Mike, you could speak to Westport a bit. I mean, you were actually leading that process, and that's not why it stalled. But again, it was a very rational move to say maybe a moderate approach building on history might get us there. But again, that may be do a little bit of analysis.
No, as long
Mike,
as is it a part of an incremental process, right? In other words, if you're going through all of the pain and sweat and tears to introduce this idea, which to some is radical and to some is welcomed, and then to have to make all of those logistical adjustments, which are very difficult, don't bother doing it at all unless there is that complete health benefit to reduce anxiety, depression in adolescents and improve their health, et cetera. And I'm being a bit of a devil's advocate and asking because this is my first meeting, so far be it for me to be too talkative. But am I
Well, I mean, I will say, when we started talking about this, that 8:30 time frame, I mean, years ago, even with a prior superintendent, I sent the American Academy of Pediatrics study that says, adolescents should not be
That's right.
starting school until 8:30. And I was like, what are we doing about this? But what we're running into, I think Bill has been very careful. He calls it start and end time. And what we're running into is if we try to do that 8:30 start with the current structure of our school day, it puts our kids getting out at such a late time that it just wreaks havoc with every sort of after-school co-curricular activity that our families across the spectrum in the district participate in. So some of this will be to your point about, is this a step, in a process? I view it that way. Maybe some of the constraints on the after side or the end time, as other districts come on board, some of that constraint that we're facing may go away, but we can't say it will or it won't, but it might ease up some of those strains. I mean, whether it's kids going to Westport to participate in dance classes or music lessons, if it's our high school athletes,
and have there been meetings with the other district leaders?
This has been talked about a great deal, but and Jill Gaudet, who came in, and again, I have to talk about Grand Share, I'm sorry. Jill Gaudet, who came in as superintendent last year, is an advocate out of Illinois on this issue. Her first comment was, if you're going to do this, do it regionally.
Right.
Because as Ralph Mayo, who's the interim super, has said, the morning is a lot better at Greenwich High. The afternoon is a disaster. They have cut back instructional time. They have a budget that's $1.4 million larger than it should be. They're cutting academic programs to support the transportation on this. So the morning is feel better. So Chris Winters, who left as headmaster, said, get us back to 8 o'clock. Then they would feel that 7:30 to 8 shift would do it. So it's kind of thinking about the incremental and then the only reason for incremental is don't do incremental planning to get to 8:30. Go to incremental, because I would argue, as Ken has, that the 15-20 could make a difference. That even that little bit, if it's not going to create a financial burden, a logistical burden for your staff, while we watch. Because soon the advocates will show up here and say, Bill, you are wrong on the research, but I am not. Give me a large N where you have districts making this change that then shows the medical benefits. We have medical research that's excellent, but in the context of many, many sites making this kind of change, are you seeing those same benefits? Or the unintended consequences, are they taking over the benefits? Students staying up later to get the work done, giving up activities, loss of instructional time. It may settle out to say it's still worth it, but that's why one reason I had argued, you can tell I care, argued clearly on more of an incremental if you're going to do this, Weston. So the board was agreeing, say, okay, let's understand it there, but this is now the discussion. Because the narratives, as you'll get back, will be some people saying in the narratives, out of the 300, Craig, maybe, I don't know how many, but saying it's not enough. Do this, but go to the 8:30.
So, I mean, Dan, do you still have some questions? Okay.
So one clarifying question. Right now, the delta between the start times between the lower schools and the upper schools is 45 minutes. Bill, why are we looking at adding 5 minutes to that if we make any shift?
It was an analysis to get the buses to cycle through most effectively. If it's a little tight now.
Okay.
So if you could go in and change the schedules now without a start time, you might try and build in that 5-minute shift anyway.
Okay.
Because getting them to cycle back on your current system has been a pinch.
Okay. No, that's helpful. The second thing is, we're talking about doing a traffic impact study. What percentage of the town traffic during the morning time holistically is school related? Because, and the reason for my question is, if it's one thing if you're worried about the school creating traffic at certain points of time that's going to commingle with traffic for other purposes, whether it be commuting or people coming through the state road or whatever the case may be. But if a large percentage of the traffic is school related, then no matter what time you start the school day, you're going to have that same number. So do we have a breakdown as to what percentage of the traffic is school related versus not?
The Weston Police, not yet. The Weston Police they're willing to do that analysis for us. I think the time of that would be if we're going to continue really digging into this, they could do that.
Okay.
But they've said they could do that at essentially almost no cost to us,
Okay.
which is a benefit.
No,
Other
that's
districts had to spend money on
That's
that.
definitely helpful. And
Yep.
thank them for me. And then finally, with regards to the staff at the lower school, when we take a look at, and Ken alluded to it before, or he actually didn't allude to it, he just stated it. When we went from the 3 tiers to the 2 tiers to get that extra 15 minutes for the upper schools, what we did was we pulled back the elementary schools from an 8:45 to an 8:30 start time. Really, what could have been done, and I understand, and this kind of goes to Taffy's point about why we're making these changes incrementally, we actually could have gone to the 8 o'clock right then and there, instead of going from 7:25 to 7:45. But I understand that that was probably too heavy a lift at the time or anything else like that. So when we talk about the impact on the lower school families and the lower school staff and whatever the case may be, we're really just looking at reverting back to what the system was prior to going to the 2-tier system. It's just reverting that back, and it's making a positive change for the upper schools. So it's not, I don't think we're asking too much. It's a system that worked very successfully for a number of years, and while I understand things do change, going back to an 8:45 or an 8:50 start time for Hurlbut and Wiss is really not that fundamentally different than where we were before we made the start time change in the beginning. So I just wanted to put that out there. And if you're asking for opinions, personally, I think there's enough substance here to continue the conversation. I think we've seen enough as far as the benefits and the lack of total resistance to be overcome. There's just minor obstacles to be overcome, but there's not a big pushback against this. I definitely think there's enough there for us to continue exploring this issue.
I probably already know the answer to this question, but I'm just going to put it out there. Could we separate the findings by parents per school so that we understand the results of high school parents versus Hurlbut parents?
Yeah, we can break it out that way. We've actually looked at it that way. The differential, so again, Ruby, high school to
Just like by school, so lower to upper.
yeah, the differential isn't that great. I mean, we can break that out for you, but one reason we felt comfortable, I'm sorry? Yeah, so the final one you'll get in April, you'll break it up. You're
And-
not going to see a big swing.
And did you get the same amount of responses
Yeah, I would.
between the two?
Yeah,
Okay.
we wouldn't have collapsed them. We would have left them separate if there was big distinction, and
Okay.
there's not.
And I took the survey, so forgive me for not remembering. Was the science put up front at the beginning of the survey?
That's an excellent question. We did not go down the route of putting out background explanation. I'd have to go back and refresh a little bit. We had the big intro memo that's traveled, and that did summarize some of it.
Okay.
There was a document we'd put out that I didn't put, and we can get to you, where we did summarize that, and that was out to all families.
Right. Okay,
And actually,
great.
as I think now a bit more, we did have that in the front end.
I thought we had links to it.
We had the links
Great.
to it. So we had
Perfect.
the links,
Yep.
and we said, yes. So
They
it was-
weren't responding blindly to questions about later time change, but rather with the knowledge that there was an
If they chose to avail
Right, it wasn't a
themselves.
forced read, but it was there.
If they chose to avail themselves, it was a link.
but a link that I'll have to go back and look
Yeah,
at it.
no,
But it was
I'm sorry, I'm not even remembering the only thing I helped write, but we put up there, it's here if you want to read it, made it really clear,
But
and then said, here's
presume-
the survey.
and presumably a sentence or two that said we're doing this survey because science
Yes.
tells us there are health benefits.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and I mean, the working phrase I carry is that the medical benefits are beyond debate.
Right.
The logistics, though, may not allow us to get to those medical benefits. That is I think that is still the question of the hour.
I don't know whether this is the time to comment on that question of the hour, but you know, there are other, and I agree that the logistics are just a nightmare. But you know, organizations, nonprofit organizations, went through this debate when thinking about doing background checks on all their employees or all their staff or all their volunteers that worked with young children, and what a logistical nightmare that was to do. And the consequences of not doing it were too great, and they figured it out. And so this is one of those times where I do find myself holding my head a little bit and saying, I know the logistics are going to be a nightmare, and, you know, and we hope we can, you know, work through them.
Right, and I would only suggest to the board, given you know you're going to the logistical challenge, and now you're going to get my recommendation, do we have the bandwidth right now as administration to guide you through that? We do not. We do not have the bandwidth to get you through this right now. We have to first see where does the budget decision settle out, because we may be having to face some decisions where we're trying to work through some significant decisions with the district to handle. Because we can, again, you look at area districts, we can get to the other side of logistics, but it's going to, even at 15, 20 minutes, it will take a lot of work. It'll take just making sure we're not having hidden financial costs and how we overcome that. We'll have to look at traffic studies, traffic analysis, so we hit some hot spots. We can work with the community to say we'll work through this, because that's another area of backlash. We'd have to look at after-school impact on participation, getting to things, which we may get to all of that, but even at a 15-20, that we could still face those things. So we just have to be ready. We'd have to do more focus groups, do more, you know, runs of analysis on all kinds of things, which certainly between now and fall 19, we can't pull it off. And it'd be more thinking towards even fall 20, which allows us more time to think through a number of these very, very good questions.
But would it be reasonable if the board still wants to at least say that this is something we're interested in continuing, with now looking at the work taking place during the next school year, with possibly looking at FY20, the fall of FY20, as a potential implementation? Working through next year and then...
Right. And so to give value to the survey, give value to this preliminary piece, give value to what you'll get in April, I would say from this first pass at inquiry, what are the really burning questions, to use a phrase from Ken earlier, what are the burning questions you as a board want us to grapple with as we head into that next phase? So it could be, you know, how serious are some of these logistical issues, and begin to pinpoint them. You know, other things you'd want to get more understanding. Are different approaches here? How much interest is there in a flip? When you get the narratives, you'll see there are a number of parents saying, it's not enough, push further. So that might say, you actually should go out and check that. Because once you open the door on this to really get serious, you open the door. And you may get a good number of parents who walk in and say, well, no, you really got to go for this. And they could win the day, which is you go for 8:30. Because this is a very organized issue in Connecticut. And rightly so, there's very strong advocates that could then show up, and so that we just got to be ready for that.
Yeah. And to be clear, when I said we should continue to explore it, under no circumstances do I think this is something we should be looking at for the start of the 2019-20 school year. The timing's just not right.
Yeah, I agree with that. But, you know, I think given the logistical nightmare that this presents, I do think we should be doing the work to see, you know, to really look at ultimately something that would be meaningful rather than 15 and 20 minutes. I think that let's put in the work and do the work, and if it takes us a year or 2 years to work through it, I think it's well worth it. But I always thought doing something incrementally would just, you know, we would have to ultimately do that work again, and it's just so much work to do. Let's just do the work once and do something more meaningful, even if it takes us a few years to get there. I don't know, that's kind of my thought.
No, I agree with you in theory, but then when I hear the stories of Ridgefield about how they took that approach, and then so they couldn't have any movement, so they chose no movement, and
And
like
then,
the point I
and
made
in
before.
And then in
Yeah.
Greenwich,
Yeah.
where they did it, and then they've had to basically almost like
Yeah,
rip
but
You know,
apart things
we're not the
mid-school
first
year.
movers, so we could learn from some of their
We
experiences
were
and make.
some of the first movers. We did it. We made
No,
some
but
progress.
I mean, some of the big, now there's some, some other data points where maybe we can learn some things from. I don't know.
Mike, did you?
Yeah, I would just add, I went a long way through this conversation,
Yeah.
and we started with that, trying to get to that goal line of 8:30, which, by the way, if you talk to the American Academy of Pediatrics, 8:30 is sort of their compromise. I mean, they might really suggest well beyond that. So, yeah, right. I mean, really, they're looking at 8.5 to 10 hours, 8.5 to 9.5 hours of sleep based on circadian rhythms and sleep patterns that put high school students to bed naturally around 11, 12 at night. So if you're thinking about that and getting into the science, it gets very very complicated.
Yeah.
When we began talking about this here in Weston and looking at that sort of middle ground of an 8 o'clock-ish start, it's a very reasonable approach. And in fact, I went back to look at the former committee that I was on. Their resolution and recommendation ended up being that no school would start before 8 o'clock. So after all of that, they got to essentially kind of where we're starting right now. And I can't cite the research off the top of my head, but there was some indication in some of the work that we had done that there was benefit to the incremental change. So it's not that you go all the way to 8:30 and get all of it, or if you don't do that, you get none. It's that there are little bits of growth along the way. So it's a good discussion to have. I would just encourage all of us to keep moving with it and not get hung up in the don't let perfect get in the way of pretty
Right.
good, and keep moving.
Well, I think keep moving is the right thing to do. Yeah.
And with keep moving, can we,
Yeah.
any burning questions other than to say that I think,
Well, yeah, I just would ask, we'll bring to you, and it'll be on, and maybe the agenda, well, the April meeting's gonna be a pretty full agenda as well. We'll have to you that full April, and the full report in April, and I would just ask board members as they read that full piece, because we'll weave this one into it, what you got tonight. Just to begin to list what are some of those burning questions you want us to be thinking about. But we're gonna have to get through this year, get this whole cycle before we really dig into those. But we at least could be, I want to do justice to the survey, I want to do justice to your efforts looking at it. And think on what Mike said, and think on that multiple area districts have tried to get there, and none have moved in this region other than Greenwich.
and Bill, just for our newer members, I guess it's going back a year. The memo that you did where it outlined some of the challenges if we went too late, the things we were running into on the back end about why. That's how we ended up with this 8 o'clock compromise. If you could recirculate that out, because I think that will answer some of the questions about how we came to be about moving forward, at least with discussing the 8 o'clock start time. Because that had a lot of the detail of the challenges on the back end that we were facing.
Yep.
Can I ask for a nice to have in this? Not a need to have, is if we can put some of the answers in graph form, because all this text is really overwhelming. Just like
Yeah,
high
no,
level graphs in here.
Yeah,
in
you'll
terms of
have that.
responses.
No,
Okay, great.
Yeah, in fact, the graphs
Tables.
existed, and I just went with the narrative quick hit summary, preliminary, and then following that.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Thanks, Bill. All right. Now on to the school calendar.
The principals are going to go. That was the plan. Yeah, there we go. Yeah, they asked
Thank
us.
you, principals.
Bill, would you like me to take the
Yeah,
school
you got
calendar? Okay. So in the interest of time, I will be efficient in the summary. So just, we did have 2 board members in this process. We had 2 committee meetings, which are 3 bargaining groups we're a part of, as well as the PTO. Bill, myself, part of the committee. And follow the same process as we have in years past. We look at the upcoming calendar, 2019-20, see if any modest adjustments need to be made based on the current year's experience, and then we look to build out the 2020-21 calendar. So in your packet, you have 3 calendars. The 19-20 approved by the board last year. We have a refined version of the 19-20 calendar that we'd like you to consider. And then there's the 2020-21 calendar. I'll just take each one of those calendars individually and just briefly walk you through. So for the 2019-20 calendar, you might want to have them both side by side, the one that's approved and the one that's proposed, with a couple modest changes. And there are really 2 things that the committee felt that would be helpful. In looking at the conference schedule, we have the conference schedule currently approved at November 1st being the first day of conference, then it wraps around into the election day week. We had some feedback that that first day of conferences, having it on the 1st, would be under-attended, likely because parents coming off of Halloween. Also, we've seen that not many parents were taking us up on those conferences this past year around that time, and staff also indicating that they prefer not having 2 weeks broken up, since you're going to have 1 week broken up with election day anyway, to place those conferences within that election day week. So when we look at the revised calendar, we have a full day on Monday, November 4th, a election day off, then Wednesday, Thursday are partial days with late arrivals, and then the Friday is an early dismissal for the weekend. So that would be for our K-5 schools those days. Then the second suggestion is in terms of professional development. This came from our professional growth committee through me to the calendar committee, that we're finding that we do have needs for additional time, smaller chunks of time, in addition to the full day professional developments infused within the calendar. And so this past year we tried adding a early release day on December, I think it was this year I think it was around the 10th. But for the next year's calendar, we have it on December 11th. We're looking to add a second early release attached to the extended weekend in February break. So looking at February 12th, this calendar would add a second early release, effectively slightly extending that February break. We did not find that the absences that week with that extended February break were out of the ordinary. We felt that they were definitely well within reason. So taking this, we felt comfortable with that additional early release there. So so for 1920, I don't know if there's any questions about those 2 recommendations. I don't know if, Gina, you'd want to we approve these separately or together, if there is consensus around making those changes to the 1920, or do you want to take 1920 and 2021 together?
Well, we're still in just a discussion
Yeah, it's just
tonight.
presentation tonight.
Oh, it is? Okay.
Yes, it was only supposed to be presentation.
Yeah, it's just discussion, and the vote would be in April.
Okay. So
just-
then,
I'm sorry, Ken, just to clarify. So with the February break, we're not seeing on either end of this elaborate 5-day weekend, we're not seeing absentee rates on either side showing like pressures from families about wanting that full week off.
no, we haven't had that that feedback. I know several years ago we looked into that full February break versus an extended weekend, and at this point, it is of greater importance to families, from what we've gleaned, that last week of June, the last full week of June, is a greater priority than having that week of February. Plus, having that extended week with the Thursday, Friday gives families an opportunity with setting their, if you like to go skiing, they avoid some of the rush of that President's Week by being able to use that weekend.
Any other questions about the slight revisions to the 1920?
Okay.
2021?
So 2021, and just for our newer board members, we're required to have 180 days, student days. We also built into our teacher's contract 7 additional work days. 2 of those at the beginning of the year are for getting up and running, meetings and setting up classroom. One of those August days is for professional development. Then we infuse an October day, an election day, and a March day for professional learning. Students are not here for those days. And then at the end of the year, after the students leave, we have a full day where we have a district meeting. We break down all the tasks for the year to close out. So that's the student day and the teacher day. So one of the things as we build the calendar, we always look at, as I just alluded to, having that last full week of June, and on the proposed 2021 calendar, that's the week of June 21st. We'd like to be done by June 18th if we follow past practice. So the last day for students on this 2021 calendar is projected at June 10th, last day for teachers on the 11th. That would give us 6 days prior to that last full week of June for inclement weather days. So kind of just giving you a sense, building the calendar, that was one of the things we looked at. With there's always the question in August of whether we start, a week where students start on a Tuesday, a Wednesday, or a Thursday. On this calendar, we thought that, given how the calendar falls, having those 3 teacher days in there, 24th, 25th, 26th, would allow for a Thursday start, which, we heard from some staff at the lower schools that's easier to have a shorter week. At the high school, secondary level, we heard that starting on a Tuesday, they like that. It gets more days in earlier on. Any jump on the AP schedules in May, they like to have that. They like those full weeks. Given that, if we were to start teachers on either the 20th or 21st of August, shooting for a student start date of the 25th, just felt that was uncommon for us in Weston, a little too early. So that's where we settled on the Thursday 27th start date. In September, just walking you through these months, September 18th is Rosh Hashanah. The first day of Rosh Hashanah is on Saturday the 19th, begins sundown on Friday the 18th. Now normally, that day before would not be a day off, and in here we're following that, but with the twist of we're adding an early release for families that may be looking to travel, staff and families looking to travel for that holiday. Does allow our athletes to finish up practice before sundown. In the region, not everybody set their calendar at this point, but we have seen a variation. Some, such as Region 9, the CES calendar, are taking that day completely off. Others, such as Richfield, a couple may not be taking. They're having a full day of school there. So it's really, I think it's what you see best for the community here, and the committee recommended that we go with a early release. October, we have the Columbus Day. The November conference calendar follows what I just suggested for the 1920 calendar. December, we have an early release on the 9th and on the 23rd. The 9th is for professional development. January, we come back after the break on January 4th. February, again, follows that same structure that I just outlined for the 1920 calendar, with the earlier release on the 10th. The March follows a similar structure as we've just experienced here in the district this year, with the Monday being a full day off after the K-5 conferences, allow for professional development. The April break is right in the middle of that month. And then you see, getting into June, Again, June 10th, the last day for students, so.
Just a quick question about April. Good Friday is on the 2nd, so we have that day off. Then we go to school for a week, and then we have the break. Was there a thought to moving the break week up so you would end up with a nice long break by having the wraparound?
No,
Just a
because of
question.
how long that stretch would be from that first week all the way to the end. But we kind of followed a similar structure that we had.
Yeah, but I mean, there was discussion
question.
about it going back to last year's calendar or the previous year's calendar, and like Ken said, the thought that it creates a very large period of time at the end of the year. There was also some issues with compatibility with the CES calendar, as well as the fact that traditionally it's been this district's practice to have April vacation that week, regardless of when Easter is, because Easter fluctuates every year. Traditionally, we've just ignored when Easter and Good Friday happen, and just the April break has been that week, no matter what. So, but there was discussion about it, and just basically all the stakeholder groups kind of agreed that this was where it should be.
And then just, you're talking about having an early dismissal for Rosh Hashanah. Did we look to see when Passover falls, about having an early, if it falls during a school day?
It falls on the 27th, so
So it's on a Saturday.
I'm not sure if that's
Okay.
the evening of the
Yes, it's Saturday.
26th?
No,
It starts,
so it
yeah,
was
it starts
fine.
on the evening
Okay.
of the okay. Well, anyway, it does not fall on the
Perfect, good, sorry, thank you. Any other questions? Please encourage your friends to take a look. We will be voting next month on the proposed changes and also for the adoption of the 2021 calendar. So take a look. Thank you, Ken. Operational update.
So we discussed this at the March facilities meeting, an operation update of the current year. So there's 5 sections: facilities, food service, security, finance, and the copy center. So starting with facilities, just through the first 6 months of the year, there were 892 work orders issued, along with major projects that include the installation of Alertus, installation of interactive classrooms, the athletic streaming camera on the soccer field, as well as the gym, LED lighting upgrades, repairs to boilers, and then repairs to backflow preventers. And the work orders are really largely split between the high school, middle school, and Hurlbut. We do have certain areas of facilities on regular maintenance schedules, such as exterminating, generator maintenance, elevator maintenance, chiller maintenance, fire alarm inspection, the xenon plant, emergency lighting, the septic tanks, grease traps, boiler cleaning, air conditioning maintenance, and snow blower maintenance, as well as drain maintenance and sprinkler maintenance. As we look forward to next year, we're going to look to issue RFPs for a new elevator preventative maintenance contract, which will, and then as well as a Dectron, which is the heating installation on the side of the middle school for fiscal 21 potentially. That's the pool water temperature device. Boiler cleaning preventative maintenance service agreement, district-wide sewer analysis, which we emailed to the board the other day. And then at a future finance committee, we'll probably have a review of our facility chart of accounts and show really what is preventative maintenance versus general repairs and how the facilities budget breaks out between maintenance, grounds, and custodial. We do have priority needs in facilities in terms of just general repair allowance and preventative agreements. If we move to food service, Andre, our food service director, has worked with the high school and middle school to incorporate in our culinary program certain academic offerings to create certain theme menus, such as French Week in collaboration with the World Language Department. He has brought our dietitian in to work with the middle school, and he's worked with the science department at the middle school to eliminate plastic straws. We did have a renovation here of the cafeteria at the middle school, which did come out very nice. The food service program is actually having a record year financially. Year-over-year profits are up 96%. So we're doing very well this year. Weston also won Chartwell's Platinum Award account for quality and performance. Moving forward to security, the security coverage has worked well this year as we went from 8 security specialists down to 6. The security specialists have rotated throughout the schools to cover breaks, allow security walkthroughs. It's actually allowed all the security specialists to familiarize themselves with not just their one individual school. We do use Alertus for all our drills and send out drill notifications to the community in terms of what drill was completed and the purpose of the drill. We did institute more drills this year than in any previous year in an effort to systemize our drills and emphasize the importance of the drills in each of the schools. We did implement Raptor visitor management this year at each of our schools. If we move forward to the finance department, we did issue, and we talked about it in the budget, RFPs for the Xenon plant, life insurance, disability insurance, the fire alarm contract, trash removal, propane, and benefit advisory services, all saving over $100,000. And as I mentioned earlier, we are working on RFPs for elevator maintenance and boiler cleaning. We issued an RFP for a cleaning contract, which is up next. We converted Munis, which is our financial software system, to the cloud. We again had another successful audit, which was completed by an outside auditing firm called Bloom Shapiro, who is appointed by the Board of Finance, and we had a clean opinion statement. And then finally, looking at the copy center, we did reduce staff in previous budget years at the copy center due to budget constraints. And in order to streamline copying process, we did implement a program called PaperCut, which allows us to track remotely processing jobs, time it takes for those jobs to turn around. And then we also did institute new copy center guidelines to encourage staff to make smaller copy requests at the building level to reduce demand at the copy center.
Gene, if I may, just for the board, last year was the first year in a long while we'd had an annual operations summary. We started doing that. We have an academic summary. We're in March. The year's not obviously done, but we thought it'd be important to do this update. Facilities Committee saw more of a narrative presentation from Rich. Asked for it tonight in the PowerPoint just to kind of be efficient. But I think it's timely and important that we are looking at this at least annually. But I think it's a good summary of the entire piece. One thing that is in timeline format here, so Rich really did try and listen to all of you, was going back. Slides aren't numbered, but that regular maintenance annual schedule, that is a new piece. It was a straight up list before, but now it's been put into a timeline, if you will. So that's very, very helpful.
Questions, anyone? Rich, thank you. Thank you. I like having the schedule. Next iteration of it, at some point when it's appropriate, which of these are internal versus external? I know it's an evolving process, and whenever it happens.
So we'll probably bring at the next facility committee meeting a schedule that breaks it out by month, and then also some of the items that we don't do because we don't have the resources to do, but we would like to do in the future.
Thank you, Rich. Cleaning contract.
So with the current janitorial services contract with Shamrock expiring on June 30th of this year, we did issue an RFP for janitorial services starting July 1st, 2019 for a period of 5 years. We did receive 6 bid submissions from ABM, Finico, Shamrock, our current provider, SMG, American Maintenance, and Compass Cleaning. We did establish a bid review committee to review the firms, interview the firms, ask questions. The bid review committee did consist of myself, the director of facilities, Ellen was on it, Nicole at the WIS, Drew at the middle school, Andre Santelli, our director of food services, a lead custodian, and then Andrew in my office. After reviewing all the bids and meeting with the companies, there was a strong consensus to recommend Finico as the replacement company. They have provided cleaning services to the University of Bridgeport, the Norwalk Public Schools, the University of Connecticut, Bridgewater Asset Management, Purdue Pharmaceuticals, and the Maritime Aquarium. They are SIM certified and a green certified approved company. After calling references, Finico did have very stellar references, so we would recommend moving forward with Finico for a 5-year contract, however, with the right to terminate with 90 days notice should we so choose to. We wouldn't expect to. The contract does fit within the budget that was adopted by the board earlier in January.
Is the 90 days for them to pull out as well? It's reciprocal?
Typically, it would be for us to do.
Okay.
If I could have a motion, and then we'll go to questions.
The Weston Board of Education directs the superintendent of schools or his designate to sign the recommended contract for cleaning surfaces with Afinico for a period of July 1, 2019 to June 30, 2024.
May I have a second, please?
Second.
Thank you, Tony. Any questions or comments from anyone? And Taffy, I just want to let you know, they did have the bid review committee that reviewed all of the bids, met with a select number, and then once that process was completed, this came through facilities, and then also because of the monetary thing, through the finance committees before it's landed up here, just to give you a little bit of process about how we ended up here tonight.
And I just wanted to take a moment to thank Ellen for serving as the board representative and for everyone on the team. I have an idea about the depth of work that was involved in this, reviewing all those RFPs, and I just wanted to thank you all for your service.
Any further questions or comments before we vote? All right. All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you.
If I may just make a comment, I want to thank the whole process here. Since I've arrived, and I'm not sure when we inform Shamrock of the shift.
Within the current, well, probably by next week, we will let them know.
All right, given we're in a public meeting, and we may need to accelerate that. But I think that this is a really important transition for the district, and we want Shamrock to finish well with us. But I think this has been a point of discussion now, at least since I arrived here. Also, the fact we're able to bring this in, it's an increase, but at a much lower increase than we ever anticipated is really, really important. So thank you.
Financial update, Rich?
Yep. So this is the financial report through February. Through February, we do have an adjusted budget of $51.4 million with year-to-date expenditures of $32.4 million, encumbrances of $17.9 million, special ed encumbrance holds of $140,000, and anticipated expenditures of $1.1 million. This does leave a projected deficit of $111,277. There are transfers totaling $128,886 for approval, with 5 in excess of $5,000. The first is for $45,434 for a leave of absence teacher, $45,000, $252 to partially extinguish the special education tuition deficit, $5,000 in special ed legal fees, $12,500, which is an accounting transfer for snow removal for overtime, and then $5,100 for legal fees for the district. If we move forward to the Internal Services Fund, we do have a positive net change before IBNR runout of $17,304, and that is due to a reimbursement check that we received from Aetna, our previous health insurance provider, for $32,630. This does leave a fund balance after runout of claims of $1.55 million.
If I could have a motion, please.
Move that the Weston Board of Education approve the 8th fiscal 19 financial update and approval of transfers presented by Mr. Rich Rudel.
May I have a second, please? Thank you, Tony. Does anyone have any questions, comments? Okay. All in favor? Thank you. Lewis, non-renewals.
Thank you. So we're doing something a little bit different this year. As you may know, some of you may know that we normally do our non-renewals of non-tenured teachers in April. We're doing it in 2 waves this year. So the bigger group, your long-term substitutes and so forth, and any additional reduction in force non-renewals will come next month. It really all depends on the Board of Finance vote. This is sort of to deal with things we know we have to deal with. There could be changes. There could be additional leaves and that sort of thing, which may result in us not having to reduce and force the 3 teachers I'm going to announce. These teachers are all aware of this. This is not a performance-related decision, as I try to emphasize every year. This is simply due to elimination of positions and the moving of tenured teachers in place of non-tenured, or in this district, we choose between the non-tenured teachers who are non-renewed. Some districts have, sort of last in, first out rules for non-tenured teachers. We do not, which is a big benefit. A lot of Durgay districts are like that, where we have that benefit. this is a somewhat unique list in that, in you shouldn't take from this that we're cutting a reading specialist or a sixth grade science teacher. This is simply because of the dual certifications of multiple employees. We would choose to move certain people around, but these are all non-tenured teachers who are affected right now. Depending on how everything pans out, we could get another section of kindergarten. Who knows? We just don't know. But for now, these are the three folks. Again, emphasizing this is not a performance-related non-renewal. It is a reduction in force related. The first one is Caitlin Weir, Hurlbut Elementary School second grade teacher. Tracy Perez, who is a Hurlbut Elementary School reading specialist. And Jennifer Nollyberg, who is a sixth grade science teacher here at the middle school.
Thank you. Could I have a motion, please?
Move that the superintendent of schools is directed to notify the following teachers that their contract of employment will not be renewed for the 2019-2020 school year. Caitlin Weir, Hurlbut Elementary School second grade teacher. Tracy Perez, Hurlbut Elementary School reading specialist. Jennifer Nollyberg, Weston Middle School sixth grade science teacher.
May I have a second, please? Thank you, Ellen. Any questions, comments? All in favor? Thank you. Louis, first
Okay.
read.
So we have three policies on for first reading. I promise I'll be quick. The policy committee reviews these policies in depth at our committee meetings, and these three. Covered student privacy. I want to assure you, the Educational Records Act, the Educational Records Policy, which covers FERPA and other protections, is well established in Weston. This is a new policy that has to do with rules governing the information gathered in surveys regarding students. What's a confidential survey, such as a survey, seeking that sort of thing. Those are occasionally done. There's a law that governs that, and this is all verbatim out of your outside counsel's recommendation, Shipman and Goodwin, and the policy committee sent it forward for a first reading. And for those of you who are new, the first reading we do within 2 readings, and then we vote at the second meeting when it comes forward to actually approve it. So you're not approving it tonight, we're just sending it forward to the next meeting.
But if you do have questions.
Yes, if you have questions.
Feel free to ask questions.
May ask your questions.
Next.
Move on? Okay. The next policy is an existing board policy with extensive changes. Again, these changes are all recommended by Shipman and Goodwin, your outside counsel, and this has to do with the restraint and seclusion and use of exclusionary timeouts for students. The statute was amended, and there are a lot of changes. This is a very strict area of the law that we need to follow when it comes to taking these sort of extraordinary measures. This policy
Louis, what's the most significant change here?
Greg, they can't, mic's out.
We can't hear you.
So basically, there are. You can't hear me?
Now we can.
Oh, I'm sorry, 'cause I'm looking at the underlining, trying to find an answer to that.
Oh,
So,
okay.
pulled it up. How's that?
Yeah.
Does that work better? Okay.
I figure instead of looking at the underlying, I just
Yeah,
asked.
yeah. So, well, first of all, it defines, the old policy used to define restraint of a person at risk. The law was changed to make that very clear, that that's students. We're not talking about adults here. It also has very specific rules regarding what a room can be for, for a timeout for a student, to exclude them from the rest of the population. What kind of locks or no locks, the height of the ceiling, the fact that someone needs to be able either in the room or see in the room at all times. This is not something that happens very often, but it does sometimes happen. So there's some very specific rules about what we can do, what the definition of what the room can look like in an exclusion situation, and we had a policy in place for a long time about this. There's just a lot of new restrictions on how we can restrain, how long we can restrain, in what ways. It can never be used, obviously, and this has been our policy forever, as a punishment tool.
Lewis and/or Craig, we can't open this one. It tells us that we don't have access to it. It needs a special web page. It's just this one.
Yeah.
Just this one, yeah.
Yeah, just this one.
Must be highly, highly sensitive. Just at some point, could we get sent again?
Yep.
Oh.
Tony, to answer your question, the most significant change is every couple of years, the state of Connecticut updates the law pertaining to this, and we update our policy accordingly.
Right, so you'll notice it was updated last in 2016, so it's only a couple of years ago. But this is an area, there have been cases of area districts that have sort of run afoul of this, regarding how they restrain a student, how they seclude a student for how long, and so forth. So, again, all this language is verbatim right out of your recommendation from your outside counsel.
Any questions, guys? News media?
Okay, let me just keep going here. Okay, news media relations. Now, this policy was passed in 1989, which, dating myself, is 3 years after I graduated from high school. So this is an old one. It talks about things like, radio and public press. It doesn't reflect our current policy, our current practice, which has been in place for many years, which is that press inquiries first go to the superintendent's office. The superintendent then determines who, either he, she answers it, or we answer it per the superintendent's direction. So this was really simplified to codify that. I put in a provision on my own. This is something we sort of home grew, this particular policy, because we wanted to clarify our own practice here. This doesn't in any way limit the board's ability to pass its own statements. So the board itself might want to take a position on an issue that may or may, hopefully would always be in line with the superintendent, but maybe on a totally unrelated issue, in which case you would bring it forward, vote on it, and pass it. It doesn't mean you can't do that. It just means that we, the administration and staff of the district, all press information goes through the superintendent's authority. Sometimes you'll see it come from me, sometimes you'll see it come from a principal, but it's always with Bill's knowledge. So this is just changed to reflect that. It also eliminates the former regulation and just incorporates it all into this policy. You'll notice there's a final paragraph which actually mirrors, not mirrors, but is very similar to language in your visitors to schools, which we can deny access to the press to school property if we determine that it will be disruptive or pose a risk to anyone. And we have done that. Certain incidents occur or events. We don't want news walking around the school talking to kids, that sort of thing. Usually we set up a staging area. We let Channel 12, it's usually Channel 12 or some similar station, sit at a certain part on the school road, take a not allowed past a certain point, but they could take pictures but not talk to students. So we maintain the ability to control the news media once they're here, but that, again, is all coordinated through central office, ultimately the superintendent's authority.
Lewis, is it wording too specific, meaning, what if at some point the superintendent chooses a delegate?
Yes.
Delegates that responsibility.
Right, exactly. So anytime, it says the superintendent or other administrator who the superintendent has authorized to release information.
Oh, the very last. Okay.
Yeah. So anytime we say the superintendent, it's implied that there could be a designee.
Okay.
But yes, we made it a little more specific here. You know, when things get crazy, I suppose Bill might say, hey, you know what, Dr. Craw or
Right.
somebody, you be the point person. That could happen.
Any other questions regarding this policy? Now we are moving on to items that are on for second read, and that means we would also be voting this evening. Yeah, they seem to be missing the PDF extensions.
Second reading. So this came forward for a first reading at your last meeting, and the big issue here is this policy is intended to expand the ban of possession and drinking of alcohol on campus by everyone, not just students and staff. We did build in a big exception, as we discussed at length at the last meeting, in the middle for the fireworks event that's run by the town of Weston. There's some very specific rules as to where and when it would be allowed, mostly as directed by the town, but never in a school building or you know, even during the fireworks. The other language about e-cigarettes, vapor products, a lot of that is existing language with some minor changes. That was passed, I guess the last time was in 2016. So this is really, we didn't actually have a policy on the books other than students and staff that prohibited the consumption of alcohol. And given some concerns about what happened at the Memorial Day Fair last year, we brought this language forward just with regard to the school side of the property. The other side is actually owned by the town, and this wouldn't govern that. But there have been no changes since the last reading.
It wouldn't govern it even if it's a school activity.
Well, no,
That's
so
followed.
no, it's not. So there's two parts to the Memorial Day Fair. There's the band,
Right.
and then there is the fair itself. If it's a school activity, then yes. But this is actually a PTO activity on school property. So it's a little bit different. However, we have been in conversations with the town about how they intend to govern their side of the property. If there is a Memorial Day, fair band set up again, the current idea is we would put up sort of an orange construction fence with funnels being like openings, saying beyond this point, no alcohol, like you see it. But no, we actually can't technically govern it unless it's actually our activity. So if we have like a Hurlbut fair, like Hurlbut School is having a concert, and part of it spills onto on town property, then yes, we could do that. This is sort of a hybrid because it's run by the PTO.
Okay, how are we going to communicate this? I mean, the desire. How are we going to communicate
Yeah,
the
we've
strong
talked about
desire
that.
that we have?
Well, first we need to clarify with the town what their position's going to be. And then once we have clarity on that, we can convey, because preferably it would be great to do it jointly. If
preferably.
they, however, are going to permit alcohol consumption on the town property, then we would send out a message to that effect to parents and ones that are quite as well used. So we could discuss other methods of doing that, but we would want to get it out to the community that on school property, no alcohol. But we want to clarify where the town stands first.
I appreciate that.
Any other questions? Could I have a motion, please?
Move that the Weston Board of Education approve policy 1256, prohibition against alcohol, drugs, smoking, e-cigarettes, and vapor products.
May I have a second?
Second.
Thank you, Dan. All in favor? Thank you.
Move on.
Pesticide? Yes.
Okay. So the final second reading policy is the pesticide application policy, which is a change. We used to call it the hazardous material in schools policy, which wasn't really accurate for what the policy was. The language is all recommended by our outside counsel for this one in their policy service. The only change that I made as a recommendation to the committee, which they accepted, is that the notice regarding application of pesticides, which includes herbicides, by the way, would have to also be made to school offices, because we have those fields around central office. We think we should tell our employees if we're going to do that. Otherwise, this has some pretty strict guidelines, where and when we can ever use these things. You can never use pesticides, for instance, at schools with grades lower than grade 8. That's, well, I'm sorry, grade 8 or lower. So, I mean, it's really very limiting for us. You can see some of the results of that. And this law has been in place for a while. There are some exceptions for emergency situations. If we had some sort of, infestation of some kind, ticks or something like that, the superintendent does have a certain amount of authority. But when it comes to the lower grade levels, it becomes very problematic. But we follow this very carefully. We have always been, in compliance, as I understand it, with the application. And I think, unfortunately, there's a lot of good reasons for this law, but you will also see the results of it. So in the end, the new changes are to reflect the changes in the law, but we are very conservative with this sort of, I'm not even sure we use it at all, but to the extent that we have, it's been conservative. And we haven't had, I think there was a B issue once next to the middle school. We had to do an application and we gave notice. But other than that, we don't do this very often. This doesn't include things like rodent baits and that sort of thing. That isn't covered by this policy. And unfortunately, you'll see those around some of our buildings. Office buildings, I should say.
Can we get but if we can get it
It's not attached to what?
in
Yeah,
CABE. It's not in CABE.
Oh,
I
I mean, we could put it over one more.
No, I remember, it was on for first read and we were comfortable with it.
Oh.
Just get it.
Oh,
We can
okay.
just get it added
I
to the record.
don't have an explanation for that. Apologies on behalf of.
Can I have a motion,
our district.
please? May I have a second? Everybody's getting tired. All in favor? Superintendent's report?
Yeah, you've heard a lot from me tonight, so I'll be brief on it. Also, just with some of the new board members, the super notes that come out on Friday, they've been a little more infrequent lately. I've actually been trying to pace that a bit because you've been getting a lot, so I'm not just going to be sending them out to send them out. But I do want to just do a couple updates. It was a beautiful move to Chair to have that opening music. I just want to give credit to Lisa Moretti, who's the director, and then Evan Grace, who is the accompanist on that.
And high school students.
Yes.
And high school students.
So it was really, wonderful you did that. Couple of things. We're very active. Rich, Mark are working actively to direct the team to get the baseball fields and softball fields up to snuff. Softball, we're in pretty good shape, but I want to be even-handed in us discussing ball and softball field conditions. So there's an immediate issue there we've discussed. Rich has an update out. Mark has an update out, which came out while we were literally meeting tonight at 6. I'll forward that to you tomorrow, just so you as a board have that. That went out to all the baseball and softball families. Is that correct, Rich? Yep. So we'll get that out to you maybe later tonight or this morning, tomorrow morning. Then also, you saw a memo from Rich Rudel regarding our work doing a systematic analysis of the sewage system. We'll keep you up to date on that, but there will be a note going out tomorrow to all families about fencing we're putting up on the adjacent to the South House playground. You want to?
It's behind the South House playground where the leaching fields are.
So we need to fence those off because there's some issues with the leaching fields we're trying to understand, and we don't want students, staff, or others on top of the leaching field. We're trying to figure out the problem. But there will be fencing going up, and I think it's important I put a notice out to all families in the district and staff not to be alarmed about what that fencing is. We're also putting fencing out around the tank that was discovered out here, and that notice will say the same thing. But I think important news is the town and the district, your administrators on both sides are working very closely together on this entire issue. Through Facilities Committee first, we'll keep you updated on that. But that's, I think, important news in the midst of some struggles. So that's my report.
Do any of our current committee chairs want to make any updates? Okay. I'm going to take a moment in this part of the agenda to pass around our new committee assignments. I've spoken with most of you as far as gauging what you're interested in. Here, Bill, this is a copy for you. We'll get a copy to Meredith for you to share with everybody. We are a new board, so I could have made the choice to put everybody to use our senior members to like chair everything, but the fact of the matter is we're a young board. You guys bring a lot to the table, so I'm giving everybody an opportunity to chair a committee. Taffy, we'll get to you as soon as we have an opening on a committee. I have tried to take into account everyone's professional background in their placements, their experience here on the board. I think you will see that I am only sitting officially on negotiations. Part of the reason for that is we do have so many new members. Due to FOIA restrictions, if I'm sitting on a committee, I can't necessarily talk to the members of that committee except in a public meeting. There is a lot of background information and a lot of development that has to happen. So I have taken myself off of our other committees so that I can work with everybody and help everybody get up to speed. Admins, please make sure to reach out to your chairs, your new chairs if you have a new one. And you will see there's a blank on here, the coalition. I truly loved working as a member of that organization and being a part of the process to try to help our students and our families make healthier choices. Unfortunately, with the timing of when they have those meetings, they are on the Mondays, the same day as our meeting, at 3:30 to about 5. I just cannot make those meetings. As important as I find that work and as much as I want to continue serving on that, I do not have the capacity to make those meetings. So I welcome anybody to reach out to me. You don't have to say yes or no tonight. But if you have a desire, reach out to me. I can hook you up with Laura Cleary to speak with her. You can speak with Mike about some of the work that the committee's doing. So just think about that, and I will appoint somebody after everybody's had a chance to think about things and move forward. Thank you. Principals' reports will be coming out electronically, and I was actually very pleased with the communications. We actually have about a 50% click rate. People actually are opening those and reading them. Like, that was very cool. It was very nice to see, so that's greatly appreciated, the effort it takes to get those out for everybody to see. And then next scheduled meetings.
So in your packets, and it is posted as well, is this chart, and we look at that quickly at the end of each meeting in terms of what's coming. Not just it's the entire year's mapped out here, but key things in the April meeting. Obviously, you have your committee meetings listed here, but key things will be part 2 of our look at all the facility issues. That will be the phase 2 study, but it's going to, again, to repeat myself, it will deal with both the secondary option, as I'm now calling it, and also then the elementary option. So it should be a very comprehensive set of information for you. The rest of it's listed here pretty clearly. We'll know on April 2nd what the Board of Finance votes. We actually need to get listed on here the April 8th workshop just for our own, just to remind us, because that'll be a very key budget workshop for the board to begin working through what potential reductions we as administrators bring to you if indeed that we have to do that. But that's the meeting in April laid out here. It is. I missed it. Yeah. You're right. It's right in front of me. Thank you.
And then, Tony, I do think we need to shift around the Finance Committee meeting. You're not available on? Okay. All right. Okay. Just make sure to coordinate with Rich. Okay. Thank you. And then, Meredith, if you could please transfer Sarah's recognition to April, please. Thank you. Any other comments, questions? All right, with that, could I have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
please?
Ellen, would you like to second?
Hey, Rich, you want us quickly?